Been watching ball with my big old brain and think the tape needs some explaining. Studying the stats to understand it. Hey, yo. Talk data to me. Talk data to me.
What is up, y'all? It is Dwain McFarland over here at Fantasy Life. It is episode number 2 of Talk Data to Me. We had some issues last week, guys. Gremlins got in the computer, that sort of thing. I was already scheduled to have this great guest on with us. But luckily, we were able to still steal some time from the guy that writes Stealing Signals, Stealing Bananas with Mr. Sean Siegel. You steal everything. Were you just born this way, Ben? Were you a degenerate person that would just walk into grocery stores and like just steal stuff? Or is this just something that, you know, you've grown into over the course of your life?
It's pretty funny. I was a way too straight-laced kid. I was like the younger brother and saw my older brother get into some trouble at times. And so it was like, you know, you don't want to get on mom's bad side. I never even like stole a pack of gum. I was like, you know, you don't do that stuff. I was with friends who would do it. And I was like the kid when we're walking out, like, how did you stole a pack of gum? What are you doing? You could get in trouble for that.
I'm with you. I wouldn't hang out with those kids anymore. It made me super nervous.
The background on the Stealing Signals name is that my Stealing Bananas co-host Sean Siegel came up with that when I started it years ago at RotoViz. That was he's like, this will be a hook. It'll draw people in. We'll call it Stealing Signals. And I'm like, all right, whatever. I mean, it was his idea to do the whole thing. He was like, I want you to write about every team every week. You know, I love the way that you analyze these things, yada, yada. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like, you know, my third year doing content, 2017, started doing it. And I mean, basically, it's all his fault that I have to do this much work every week. Thanks, Sean. You get known for a thing, and you can't stop doing it. That's just the way.
What's funny is we work with Perplexity. Some of you guys have probably heard of Perplexity. You know, it's an AI solution. They are in the news right now because they're trying to buy the Google Chrome search, right? It was like a $36 billion offer. So I asked Perplexity, Ben, what is Ben Gretch best known for? This is like, dude, like this is pretty cool. It says Ben Gretch is best known in the fantasy football community for his analytical approach. I like that, obviously, you know, kind of, we're both that way. Stealing Signals, your long running newsletter, but listen to this, man. You're especially known for your deep dive breakdowns and your contrarian takes that have made you highly respected as a thought leader.
Oh my God.
You're a thought leader. Did I
ever tell you that I'm really bullish on this AI thing? I mean, they get everything right. There's never been anything wrong that AI's ever done. I love AI now.
Yeah, Perplexity is awesome. So I enjoy using it. So shout out Perplexity. Had to get that out there. So Ben, we're going to start off though with a real, just not a zinger, I would say, but we're going to be talking about wide receivers today, guys. We're going to talk about the data that we're looking at to help us identify which players we want to be targeting in fantasy drafts, potentially the players we want to be fading, and really everything that wraps around that. And you guys know the idea of this show is that, you know, we're here to stretch our legs out. We're here to talk. Me and Ben might not agree on everything, but that's okay. The whole point is for us to really push one another and to just kind of think through these topics and just talk about them. So let's get started though with something I think people will love, which is if you had to pick one wide receiver this year that you think is the best value on the fantasy football draft board, who is it and why?
Yeah, this is a fun one. I think before the recent injury, my answer would have been Jaden Reed, but I am cautious about that foot in a boot. I mean, we don't get good information on camp injuries. I was tweeting about this the other day, but I don't know how to play that because it seems minor, but also I don't want to be in on guys that are hurt in August. So it's a tricky thing.
I know.
I'm going to go with another guy who's not going to play week 1. The suspended Jordan Addison, I think it would be my answer here. He's going to miss 3 games. They're the least important weeks. We often talk about this, the first few games. It doesn't mean you want to get a bunch of roster cloggers on your team that are going to be out for several weeks, but I do think 3 games is fairly manageable in the part of the season when you have the most depth, because in fantasy football, you know, we're just dealing with attrition throughout the year. Addison so his underlying data and numbers are not amazing. And I think people are really obsessed with certain types of data right now. And I think Addison's a great use case for thinking bigger picture. I like to use the term a long view. So if we take a long view on Jordan Addison, he's a 3-year early declare, first round draft capital, won the Biletnikoff as a sophomore, got Kenny Pickett drafted in the first round, then transferred to USC, was very great there. Multiple collegiate offenses where he was dominant in terms of earning volume and producing. And then he comes into the NFL. And one of the things he does right away, and we were riffing a little bit before the show, and you were talking about, what maybe we were discussing a little, what are some of the best stats? That's something we're going to talk about. And you said, if there's one stat you could have, kind of what you would use. And I loved your answer was, potentially just fantasy points per game, because people, they get so complex sometimes. One of the things that gets missed with that is the value of touchdowns, which people really don't want to put a whole lot of weight onto these days. They want to completely regress touchdowns out and act like it's not a good thing. Anyway, Jordan Addison scored 10 touchdowns as a 21-year-old rookie. He scored 9 more receiving, plus I believe 1 rushing for 10 more touchdowns last year. The guy has all this touchdown volume, and people are nitpicking stuff like his targets per out, his yards per out, which are stats that I use a ton, by the way, are not elite. He started at a pretty good level of yards per out run and only got to another, was at 1.74 yards per out run last year. That's good, but not great. The other part of this, when you take the big picture, because if you go look at his collegiate numbers, you can see that there's a guy who earned 25+% targets per route from his freshman season in college, all 3 years with strong efficiency, especially the final 2 years, big yards per route run data as a sophomore and a junior in college. And so the other thing to bring into this whole overarching discussion is age-adjusted production, and how we have to understand that when guys do things at very young ages, they're going to look different. It's not going to have the same gaudy, massive numbers. But what Addison did for 3 years in college, when you adjust for the fact that he was as young as he was, he did transfer, he played on multiple offenses, is extremely, extremely impressive. And then to step foot in an NFL offense at age 21 and do what he did. And the other big thing that I think
across from Justin Jefferson,
that's where I was just going to go. The other big thing that I think is being missed is the contextual thing, which is something we have to layer in. But the perception of him right now, I think, is highly influenced by sharing the field with Jefferson, both in terms of not factoring that into his production so far, and I think discounting his ceiling into the future. People are like, well, he's sharing the field with Justin Jefferson. There's no reason that if he's a true superstar, and he looks like one, you have this good of age-adjusted production and you're a first-round pick, and you do the things that he's been able to do at the ages he has, then at 23, which he's going into his age 23 season this year, we should expect movement forward and for him to continue to improve. That's the trend that he is on. And he looks like a legit star, like a top 20 overall wide receiver in the entire NFL with upside for more. If he's that player, the fact that he's playing with the best receiver in the league is still relevant, but it doesn't mean that he can't potentially actually earn some volume. And what's really fascinating about that, I compare him to a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I was really into him last year. I said we should probably ignore the first year a little bit. He was a 21-year-old rookie in 2023. In 2024, we saw that age 22 season really take off, and we saw it sort of start about week 7 when DK Metcalf got hurt and they had to really lean on JSN more. If you look at his full season yards per out, it's about 1.8, I think it's 1.84. From week 7 on, it's like 2.35. I mean, that's when he really was good. If you take out those first sort of 6 weeks where they were throwing a ton, he was running a lot of routes and they were a little bit more empty. He hadn't been sort of the feature focal point of the offense. And the way that I look at that is he's an age 22 receiver who has a mid-season breakout in year 2 sort of. And we see that progress through the end of the year. We've seen that with other players at different positions. Trey McBride was playing behind Zach Ertz in his second season and breaks out the second half, goes on to match those numbers into year 3. We see that ascension with young players, and you don't want to ignore it when you see it. Jordan Addison is very similar to JSN in my mind. This is a 21-year-old rookie, except he had a better 21-year-old season than JSN. JSN, we had to kind of ignore the 21-year-old season, and I'm really into him. But then he takes off in the second half of the 22-year-old second season, and we're drafting him in round 3 now. He's the number 1 on his team. I understand that. But people are not understanding that Jordan Addison probably has, if not a better, at least an equivalent profile to JSN. But the big thing that he did in the middle of year 2 to signify this breakout thing is that he basically matched Justin Jefferson for volume the rest of the way. I think it was, I'm trying to find the number here. I can't really find. Okay, so before week 10, he had more than 5 targets just once. Across the final 9 games, including the postseason, he saw 6+ every week. down the stretch in that time, Justin Jefferson had 80 targets. Jordan Addison had 70. They were pretty much neck and neck. So he actually did show this whole point that I'm making, that he's good enough to potentially even earn volume from Justin Jefferson. He showed that ability at the second half of last year, his age 22 season. This guy's younger than Jefferson, who's so obviously more in his peak as the best receiver in football. I'm not denying that about Justin Jefferson, but put some respect on what Jordan Addison did, right? Like that is incredible. I don't think they're going to be that close in targets this year. I'm projecting a wider gap. I'm projecting Jefferson to continue to be a superstar, but Jordan Addison's incredible. We saw the first preseason game, by the way, just one more minor data point. Jefferson didn't play, and this is sort of the contingent upside element that is definitely not baked into cost that we have to pay for with T. Higgins. We have to pay for with George Pickens, but we're not paying for with Jordan Addison at all. Jefferson didn't play the first preseason game. J.J. McCarthy's first 3 throws, all to Jordan Addison. First one's behind him. Jordan Addison makes an easy play on an out pattern. Third one on a comeback is low and too far to the outside. Jordan Addison makes an easy diving catch. That's why I actually like J.J. McCarthy as a mid-round quarterback this year as well. I don't know how good he is. I do know he has the best situation in the NFL because I think he has the best 2 wide receivers, and especially if you throw in tight end, probably the best 3 in terms of a 2 wide receiver and tight end option. They improved their offensive line dramatically. This is a really good offense. KOC is a great coordinator. But anyway, Jordan Addison, first 3
I love it.
throws.
And there's so much to unpack there, but like you're checking so many boxes. But what I love about where you went to is, one of the easiest ways, honestly, to get to where you're at around Jordan Addison really is fantasy points per game.
Yeah.
Like you talk about, because the targets and stuff, like now they were, like you said, 24. I've got the utilization report up right now. You guys can check this out over at FantasyLife.com. But I just did week 12 to 19. I couldn't remember. So I've got the playoff game in there. I couldn't remember what you said the stretch run.
I think it's 11 through the playoff game, but yeah, because it was through week.
I'll broaden 10. It out real quick. There we go. So yeah, I mean, but 16.4 fantasy points per game. This is PPR scoring, guys. Go back to 2011. The cutoff for the wide receiver 12, right? So 12 team leagues for a wide receiver 1 is 16 fantasy points per game. So essentially, that's what Jordan Addison was at the end of last year. You had TJ Hawkinson back in the lineup, albeit not at 100%, probably still really getting better, along the way. We're going to see a better version of TJ Hawkinson, I would think, this season. But to your point, I mean, this 24% target share is really nice, but the big thing is the 16.4 fantasy points per game. And whenever
with
I was
Jefferson healthy and as he's progressing at the end of his age 22 season, I mean, where could he go from here? Kind of.
But there's the fantasy points. You start to get, so the way I typically think about these things, I start with the fantasy points and then I want to look under the hood, right? It's like I come up to the car you go to the dealership, you're going to buy it, you start it, it's running, but then you want to check things out a little bit further, right? Do the things beneath the surface match, right? And this can go either way. You could be looking at a car, you're like, this thing kind of looks like it might be a piece of crap. But then like, as you dig into it some more, like at the fantasy points may not look good, but there could be underlying data points that make us think, there's probably more here for this player. But you mentioned several things, right? So the fantasy points, in my opinion, like do a lot of what you're talking about, but we've got these underlying data points matching. And then we've got the idea here, right, of this hyper young player that's got this draft capital invested in him. And he's got the scheme that we like. Like this man is literally checking every single box except the fact that he does have really strong target competition across from him. Having said that, to your point, he breaks out over the second half of the season. You get that 16.4 fantasy points per game. And we've seen this, Ben, over the last, we've really seen this forever, but we've seen this with several offenses over the last 3, 4, 5 years where they just become highly consolidated whenever they've got 3 really good players, or 2 really good players, so we've seen it with Miami. Not so much last year. It got more distributed across 4 guys, but before that, it was really about Tyreek Hill as well as Jalen Waddle. We've seen it with the Rams, with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. And it's a situation where, you do have a third mouth to feed, but it's a scenario where, like, are we really worried about Jalen Naylor? And they don't have to throw it to the running backs here. Like, we like Aaron Jones out of the backfield. It's fine. But they could just consolidate this offense. And to your point, Kevin O'Connell is a sharp cookie. So it's like, I love this answer because I think it's a great jumping off point. Before we go there, real quick, I want to show one other thing. I had done some research on Addison, really look at me being a terrible host. I'll eventually get to the right column here, guys. But this was my early breakout article. And to your point, I was looking into some of these data points. And if you just zoom out and you look at the year long, he got to 13 fantasy points per game last year, right? Just total. So that's in wide receiver 3 territory. Sorry, he got to 14.2 last year. So his rookie year, he scored 13 fantasy points per game. His second year, he moves to 14.2 without forming any sort of cutoff. Don't even care about the second half breakout. He's already into wide receiver 2 territory based on history back to 2011. And then if you look at his underlying data points, and to your point, take in the context of who he's playing with, but even without it, so the 18% targets go to 21%. Since 2011, that's a wide receiver 3 number. Air yards were wide receiver 2 worthy. Yards per route run, wide receiver 3. PFF receiving grade, wide receiver 2. So he's already wide receiver 2, 3, knowing that he's got Justin Jefferson across from him. What's really interesting is for year 3 wide receivers with a wide receiver 2 finish already on their resume. When we look at those guys, 64% of them, Ben, went on to be a wide receiver 2 or better. So basically you're getting what you had already in Jordan Addison last year, or you're getting something better than that. And you're getting him in round 7 or 8 of your draft.
As you were talking about the kind of squeeze for targets, and I do think TJ Hawkinson's really good, and the potential that JJ McCarthy isn't immediately amazing, or
we assume Kevin O'Connell can make everyone amazing. That's eventually we're going to run into the Peter principle where there will be someone Kevin O'Connell can't fix.
But it is interesting because he's another one of those, McVay disciples and those things. You're talking about the concentrated offenses, Miami and the Rams. It is a lot of times it is those specific offenses, which is nice as well to think through.
Hey, 27% of these guys became wide receiver 1s in year 3.
Right. You were talking about that element and talking about kind of the squeeze for routes and stuff, not routes, for targets. But what I think is so fascinating about that particular point is how baked in it is at cost, as you just talked about. So it gets to this other point of, what types of bets we want to be making and how NFL seasons are pretty chaotic and we don't necessarily know what's going to happen throughout the year. Justin Jefferson's already got a hamstring thing 2 years ago. It was a different hamstring. It was his other leg. But he went on IR with a hamstring thing. He missed 8 games. I'm not saying
contingent upside is big.
Yeah, the contingent upside is incredibly high. And I think everything you're talking about, even with Jefferson on the board and what he has been able to do in the last 2 years, which again, I want to talk about the age adjusted stuff. Doing this at age 21 and age 22 is massive. A lot of the dudes that are rookies this year were still in college at age 21 and age 22. The fact that he's at the NFL level, being able to produce at these levels, speaks about his ability to grow to a different level. And that's why you see in the data that 64% of these guys go on to continue to be good, because it's really hard to do it when you're not even at your physical peak necessarily. This guy is incredibly young, still at age 23 right now, and is going to be going into his 3rd season and has already displayed such high-end ability that you have to control for that. You have to understand what his data is in the context of his age. And then the data itself, as you said, was already wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3. And he's going behind that, There is a suspension element that's layering into this. Even before the suspension was announced, he was going, I think, a little bit late. People were factoring it in. But I do think the Justin Jefferson element holds people back on him so much that the suspension is more than baked in. The target competition is more than baked in. And he's what I like to call, I stole this from my Stealing Bananas podcast host Sean Siegel from his original Zero RB article, but it's an anti-fragile play where if things get shaken up in Minnesota, it will just get better for him. This is the floor outcome is that Jefferson and Hawkinson are there and stealing volume. But as you said, it can be very concentrated when you have this many good players. And if you remove either of those two guys, it's going to concentrate on the other two, is sort of the way that you would think about it, because these guys are head and shoulders above everyone else on the roster. No one is going to really earn volumes behind that. Jalen Naylor had 42 targets all of last year. The other 2 wide receivers that saw targets combined for 19. That's their wide receiver for 3+ volume last year in sum is 60 targets. So this is a team that's going to be hyper concentrated on these guys. And then even if one of them winds up missing time, that's just elevating Addison even further when we're already drafting him below where he produced last year, and his age could cause him to elevate further. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, hey, I love it. And honestly, I need to draft more. I think I'm at like 8%. So I'm like, right, on the average, of where you would be with a guy like Addison. But I need more. And he goes in that range where we're getting Jaden Reed. He goes in that range where you're getting Josh Downs. I like his situation a lot better than Josh. And I love Josh Downs. I think Josh Downs has a lot of things to like. But I feel much better about the offense in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell. I have at least hope that JJ McCarthy could actually be this really good quarterback versus like game managers or potentially a guy that can barely throw for 170 yards per game and a guy like Anthony Richardson. So I think you're just really spot on. Like, and cost is always a huge part of this, but let's kind of start to unpack this now. So like, let's zoom back out. You've mentioned multiple things, and they're things that I think about as well. So some of you are listening, so we'll do our best to describe it. Those of you that can check it out on YouTube, I'm sharing different screens, different slides, things like that of just research that I've done. And, obviously Ben will be commenting on these things and then adding his flavor as well. But you mentioned a few different things. Obviously we've got the talent. Talent is something that we've got to consider, and how do we go about, really quantifying, how good a player is. Then we've got, all right, where are they really in their experience or in their age curve? And you talk about the age adjusted or experience adjusted components. So I think we need to kind of unpack that. And then I think there's the offensive environment, right? There's, your quarterback, your coordinator, the scheme. And then I think, obviously another huge component is like the price and what is ADP, can we get the value right on the players? I think all those things come together. Is there another bucket that you think that I'm missing that we need to hit on?
I mean, all these things are so interrelated that how do we want to bucket it is a question we could have for an hour, discussion we could have for an hour.
Show on that. All right. Well, we won't bore you guys with that. Actually, some of you really appreciate all the comments on YouTube last week, because I did ask everybody, I tried to take the feedback, from the people, Ben, and I said, all right, hey guys, these shows are probably going to be longer. That's the intention. But if you tell us that you don't like them longer and you want them to be shorter, like, we'll listen. Everyone came back and said, who's complaining about a longer show? We want longer shows. So we're going to give you a longer show. So let's start with talent. Okay. And I've got a high level view here. I've got a process that I go through as I am ranking and tiering these wide receivers that really just essentially covers all the buckets that you hit on. Whenever we may do them a little bit differently, right? But we're hitting on the same things. And so I wanted to start first by talking about talent. And first though, I want to ask you a question about talent. Number one, I think is the most important factor, right? Especially for wide receivers. I think it matters for running backs, but to a less degree, because you get a handoff and there's 10, well, the quarterbacks usually aren't blocking. You've got 9 other players blocking for you, and a lot can go right for you. You could be in an offense that scores a lot of points. We know basically with the running backs, we want guys that catch passes, right? On offenses that can score touchdowns, but it's great to be a 5-yard per carry guy. And that's how you can still break fantasy that way. But you can also have a really good fantasy running back that pays off with honestly out being an elite talent. It's really hard to do at receiver. Like you have to be good at what you do. It's the position where just getting on the field doesn't cut it. And you guys know what we're talking about. You guys have seen these sort of players over the years that honestly at times have been steamed up. Remember the year Alan Lazard was steamed up to like round 5 or 6 in fantasy drafts because he played with Aaron Rodgers. Then after that, we went back and we did it again with Patrick Mahomes, and people were doing it with Marquez Valdez-Scantling as like a round 9 or 8 pick a couple of years ago. And if that wasn't enough, like we did it with Gabe Davis too. And these are all people that had shown that they could at least be good enough to get on the field. And this is not to bash these players. They're NFL players. They're at a level of doing something that's higher than I can ever do at the craft I'm doing. Like they're the peak. They're the tip top. So this is not a bash on these players sort of thing, but routes don't mean fantasy points. Now, within the season, routes are actually really steady. It's one of the better predictors, like week over week, rolling four over rolling four. You kind of get a good idea of who's going to be out there. But season over season, that signal diminishes. Why? Because the team seeks to replace them with someone that can actually do something when they're on the field. So I'm already going too far. I've already asked you the question. I need to stop and shut up and start with the first question, which is, in your mind, is talent the number one driver for you at wide receiver?
Yes. I mean, again, all interrelated, but I think that's a pretty easy yes. It's a position where when we look at prospects, we know that production matters more than athleticism. I mean, go back several years when I was newer in the industry, and smarter people than me were doing a lot of research into. I know Kevin Cole did research. I know the guys at like the Harvard sports business program.
Kevin does great research on athleticism, combine, and not just how it really correlates to fantasy production, but like are NFL teams actually overvaluing it for their draft picks? You know,
and of all the different positions, because some of that's not just fantasy related. Of all the different positions, wide receiver, including all the defensive, positional groups, wide receiver is the one that shows to have the least amount of correlation. And it's not just like you said, fantasy production. It's just like, you do like a approximate value, which like
wins over replacement. There's a lot of different things.
A lot of different things. And the reason for that, from my perspective, is it's sometimes overdrafted, as you mentioned, but the reason for the difference between athleticism showing to not be that important and age-adjusted production does show a ton of signal in all of these models. And we want guys who are good in college is because the different guys are going to have different levels of athleticism. But wide receiver is a more technical position. There's a lot more nuance with route running and understanding, gaps and zones and all of these types of things and ball skills, all of that, in addition to the athleticism.
Yeah, think of all the things a wide receiver has to do, guys, to get the ball. We talked about running backs. It's literally the quarterback hands it to you. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, you've got to be at the top of the depth chart, right, to get on the field and get the touches. But at receiver, you have to beat the player in front of you to get open. You have to read the coverage the correct way, because you may have a route concept that could be, it could be multiple things, but you have to read it the right way. And then the quarterback has to trust you that you're actually going to do the right thing. Then you have to actually catch the football with defenders all around you, swiping down at your forearms. And then you have to do something with it after that. Like there are just so many pieces to what it means to being a good wide receiver in the NFL. And this is not bash on running back show, but it's just a whole nother level, man.
It's a whole different
thing. And the way
thing.
defenses are playing today and the way they're trying to disguise things and not just trick the quarterback, but trick the receivers into making mistakes that then ultimately drive a quarterback mistake, like these rotations at the last second, and the different things that the defenses are doing. So,
which gets back to your point about how the receivers have to read the defense. They have to understand leverage. All these things that come into making yourself available and more open and create more separation and all of those. I mean, and so when people are like, well, this guy's super athletic, I'm comparing the athleticism in a prospect profile to the production. And what you run into is the players that are productive but unathletic and the players that are athletic but unproductive. The productive and unathletic ones, they've shown that whatever athleticism they do have, they're able to put up stats. They're able to do all those things you just described. And that tends to translate. I mean, I'm just explaining what the data shows. The data shows this. I'm not just making it up, but that tends to translate. The athletic ones that are unproductive, people always talk themselves in the athleticism. And the question is, why could you not translate that athleticism at a lower level already to more production? How you have to get
in a game against lesser athletes where honestly it should translate more.
Right.
Because you're playing, not to say college isn't good, but once you get to the NFL, like it's a level, the playing field is much more leveled. Like I think Dante Thornton is a great example of this. And I'm not saying Dante Thornton can't be a late round draft dart for you in a best ball league. But like I'm not going out of my way to get Dante Thornton, in a redraft league or in a dynasty league. Like why has Dante Thornton not already been good?
Yeah. He had like 28 catches as a career high. I mean, he's a vertical field stretcher that's going to hold the safeties and help out the rest of the scheme and basically just create more targets for Brock Bowers, who I mean,
And
as
you
a
give
wide
him
receiver,
single high, which we never get man to man. We don't get as much as we used to. That there was a day in the NFL where single high, right, was everything, whether it was zone or man. And these looks to these outside vertical wide receivers, right? The quarterback's just reading which way is the safety rotating, and they would put it on him. And that's Russ Wilson made his living off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then defense has changed, and now Russ has struggled a lot more. But yeah, sorry, proceed on the athleticism stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we were talking about talent, and my point is, and going back to the collegiate stuff, is we do want the biggest picture we can get, and we want players are not always going to be the exact same year over year. There's this element of like guys pick up injuries that sort of start to derail careers, or they maybe aren't as committed to the fitness side of things and the off-season regimen, and so they lose a little bit of their athleticism over time. I mean, I don't think there's a ton of players like that, but I do think that is a possibility. A lot of people are like, oh, how could these guys not be motivated if they're in the NFL? I mean, there's legitimately been players who've talked about, like, I just did this my whole life, and they retire early, and they're like, I never really loved football that much, and they go on to do other things. It's not, I mean, one of the things is to be at this level, you have to have a certain level of freak athleticism, and some guys just sort of get pushed down that path. And so anyway, there's probably stuff like that off the field in terms of, I think the vast majority of players have really high drive and motivation and all of those things. I'm not suggesting there's like a big edge there or anything, but the point is there's things that we don't know in every profile that's out there. The injury thing is the more realistic one to really hit on. Like a Juju Smith-Schuster had a great prospect profile, great early career, and then probably just injuries derailed that guy's career, which is tough. But the reality of the collegiate stuff that I'm talking about is when we're trying to understand talent, I keep in mind the college profile through the guys basically through his whole career. And I do think this is one of the bigger edges that gets missed. And like we're talking about Addison, his collegiate career at the ages that he did the stuff that he did helps me contextualize the shape of his career. Some of the numbers we gave aren't that amazing in the first 2 years, but this is also a market-based, cost-based hobby that we do. That's why Jordan Addison's not going where JSN is people have not really caught on to the fact that his longer view is so amazing. He's discounted because of the Jefferson stuff like I talked about. But if you understand what he was as a collegiate prospect from a profile perspective, from the age-adjusted production perspective, from multiple offenses, then you can contextualize what he's done over these first 2 years in a way that gives you a really strong picture about what he can be going forward. I get responses all the time when I'm talking about players, and it's like, this guy isn't good for these reasons. And I'll be like, okay, but that's just his rookie year. We're going into year 2. Like one of the guys I've had this conversation about with is Xavier Worthy this offseason. Xavier Worthy had some issues in his year 1 data, but a lot of it was just the misses on the deep balls. Yeah. And if you really watched all the games, you understand that some of those were a little bit fluky, a little like
somewhere on Mahomes.
Yeah, Mahomes is missing throws in some of these cases, and the teams acknowledge that. Matt Nagy's acknowledged that the big thing that they want to work on this offseason with Mahomes, there's always something they're trying to dial in. He said the one thing we're trying to dial in this year is Mahomes' deep ball. He's really worked on that this offseason. He needs to get better. He wasn't good enough last year, and that's basically directly confirmation about the Xavier Worthy role, because that's the guy that was getting open deep that he was missing repeatedly. Not a crazy amount, but like legit, like 3 to 4 big plays that Worthy did his part and was open, and Mahomes missed him. But people want to talk about. I've had the Xavier Worthy Rashee Rice stuff has been crazy this offseason. I like them both. I think they can both coexist. I think they do slightly different things in the offense. But the Worthy stuff, some of the discussions I've gotten into hyper fixates on what he did as a rookie. And again, he was another young guy, 21-year-old rookie, turned 22 in April. And this is a guy who, if you go back to his college profile, it's not sterling. It's not like Jordan Addison, but it does give you some contextual.
It was still good.
It's very good, right? It's still good. He's not just a burner. He earned a ton of volume as a collegiate player in multiple roles. He was a high ADOT guy. There's all this talk that Quinn Ewers maybe was the issue with the deep ball. Then his ADOT came down and his targets per out and all those things went up. They're like, we just got to get the ball in his hands any way we can. When an offense does that at the collegiate level, that's a great signal. Typically, one of the things we see with the production stuff for receivers is it's great signal to see when teams are willing to use them in the running game and the return game. They're like, what we're seeing in practice is that this is one of our best players. We need to get the ball in his hand every time we can. And Worthy has a little bit of that with just the changing roles throughout college and the pure volume. Even though his efficiency wasn't amazing at times, you also have to adjust for the fact that he was a young 3-year early declare that played his whole rookie season at 21. People are like, he's too small. He can't ever win press coverage. And maybe that will always be an issue for him. But you better be really confident that this guy can't develop as he gets older, because he is the fastest player of all time. And he is playing with a quarterback who's typically elevated efficiency. And unfortunately, probably was a drain on Worthy's efficiency last year by missing some of those big plays.
In college, like his targets per route run against man coverage was actually amazing, which typically if you have like this huge problem against press coverage over your whole sample, like you won't see that because teams know that and they'll just try to press you. Now they may not have always had the opponent may not have always had a cornerback they were comfortable pressing Xavier Worthy with, because if you screw that up, like it could be really bad. Like Worthy's profile was so interesting because a large portion of his targets came at the line of scrimmage, and then the other large portion came down the field. Like the intermediate part of the field was really where like we weren't for sure like what this guy can be at the next level, but we started to see a little bit more of that, last year. You mentioned what he did. I've got the utilization report up. So week 14 through 22. So essentially this is when they gave him a full-time role. So his route participation got to 80 or higher.
Yeah, guys, this is he didn't have 5 catches in a game until it's either week 13 or week 14, and then had 5+ every one of these games you're showing. From the moment he had 5 catches the first time, he had 5+ every game the rest of the year, except for week 18, which, as you're showing, he ran 1 route.
Yeah, so I mean, we've got 16.6 fantasy points per game, and he's got a 0 in there because he ran 1 route in week 18, and they decided we don't need you on the field, like we're headed to the playoffs. So the number's actually higher here. I get it, guys. Super Bowl, maybe the Eagles weren't that into what was going on at the field at that point.
Which, by the way, can we talk about that? The Eagles were not trying to give up quick scores. I know they may have had backups on, but he beat double coverage deep.
I know.
The one thing they're trying not to do is allow quick scores. I know the game was over, but like you're in prevent defense at that point, and he's still getting behind you.
Drive you crazy when people tell you you've got to exclude these data points? Like
it drives me nuts.
My challenge to that is, guys, you don't know how often this happens across the league. So if you're going to do it to Xavier Worthy, even if I acquiesce and say fine, I now need you to go back and find all those plays where that happened for the other guys and remove that from there.
Right. The point isn't to say that was like against the first teamers and the Eagles were trying as hard as they could and all that. It's to say that all the stuff in the regular season, because there's nuance to every profile. I used to love you don't, I don't think you mentioned as much anymore, but you used to always say context matters. And it's such an important point.
It's huge.
The thing about Worthy's profile, and we were talking about talent. I'm not 100% sure on Worthy's talent. He's so young and he's so fast and he's on the Chiefs, and there's all this context that we're always betting into uncertainty on talent profiles with young players. The reasons to bet on Worthy are clear. What we need to know is that he sucks to not bet on him. And people are very confident of that. And all I'm making the case is this is an uncertain profile that you should be willing to bet on because of all the things that we're talking about. But particularly the Super Bowl stuff that matters to me is not that I'm saying that's the best data point of all time. And to your point, there's always these kind of like somewhat fluky data points. And every season is a small sample for every player. But for Worthy's specific context, the stuff I was just discussing about the regular season, the misses on the deep balls that were there, if you do go turn on the film, because you do need to understand the context of how the stats were accumulated within an offense and how guys are used, and all of that is very important to all this discussion as well. It's not just raw numbers. It's never apples to apples across different offenses, different players, different usage, how their numbers were created. And for Worthy's, it was clear that the big plays drive efficiency across the league for every player in these small samples. You hit on some big, long touchdowns. You look like a 2.5 yards per out run guy all of a sudden. That just is the way that math works, right?
He's picked 54 right now consensus. So guys, this is across ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, CBS, Real Time Sports, Underdog, FFPC, right? So on Underdog,
is he capable of hitting on the big plays? Because that's the big question. And they were there in last year in the regular season, and I think that the Super Bowl shows he's capable of hitting on him.
Pick 41 on Underdog. He's slightly moving up. I've seen some people willing, honestly, just to take him at the end of round 3. I don't even hate it. Like I see what they're trying to set up with their teams. But guys, you're going to get him cheaper. Like ESPN, we know a lot of you folks, you're going to play in one fantasy league, which honestly, I get semi jealous. Like I love them all. I love all the high stakes stuff that I play. Like my background is coming up through playing in high stakes stuff, and that's kind of how I got my start in fantasy football. Shout out to all the high stakes guys that still listen and send me encouraging words. But in your home leagues, guys, like on Yahoo, he's picked 64. I mean, like there's just really no reason to not take him. At pick 64 on Real Time Sports, which is, you're talking, we've got the Fantasy Life Championship over there. You've got $300 and up entries over there. I mean, he's going 58. Now that's a 2 flex league. So people will go heavy on the running backs on you in that format. And that pushes the wide receivers down some. Sleeper pick 56. So he's relatively cheap across the industry. Right. Underdog is the area where he's pushed up the most, but we know how Underdog works. You got to start 3 wide receivers. That's one of the components. But people, honestly are pretty sharp. Like Underdog drafters, like they're not perfect, but there's a lot of sharpness and there's a sharpness in the market because so many drafts have happened versus these other, format. Right. So when you look at Underdog, guys, and you guys can see the ADP tool over at fantasylife.com, and it gives you all of these that I'm showing you on the screen, the ones I name. One of the things I like to look at, Ian does a great job of putting this out on social media, is I look at like Underdog versus some of these other platforms where there just haven't been enough drafts happen yet to let the market really sink in. Like it's really kind of a little mini cheat code that you can use because you've got...
Because wisdom of the crowds is a real thing. I mean,
yes, you have this mass market, right? It's funny you say that. One of the things that I wrote, in my tiers piece. So in The Logic of Sports Betting, which is by Ed Miller. Ed Miller is one of my favorite all-time poker authors. Like, I love playing poker, guys. Ed Miller, I've read every book that he's got out. But he wrote this book with Matthew Davidal called The Logic of Sports Betting. And essentially, Ed Miller has now gotten into these live lines that feed props, right, and everything. So he kind of started a second career after poker. But he says this. He says, market resistance is a massive red flag that you're missing something. And the best thing you can do is to stop betting into the resistance and instead try to figure out what you may have gotten wrong. Now, that doesn't mean you can't still have a sharp edge. I think you started off the show with a great sharp edge on Jordan Addison, and you already pointed out that there's 2 main things pushing him down. It's the suspension and it's Justin Jefferson, and those are real things. But at the same time, the price is so low that when it goes his way, we know he has the ability to unlock it. But some of the other things that I think about with this is, and with Underdog, again, not to say that it's perfect, but we just live in an age where, man, we didn't have this stuff 5 years ago, Ben. We didn't have this mass amount of market data. Now, you could argue it's a lot of the same people buying all the entries. And there is. People are maxing multiple contests. But at the same time, like, I think it's the best thing we've got in the way of like market intelligence. From an aspect of valuating players, to your point, by looking at what the masses are doing. So I just bring it up, guys, because it's not to say you can't go against ADP, but you should definitely consider it when you're opposite of it.
It's a fantastic point. I just wrote a big strategy guide over at my newsletter, and I talked about I called it the yin and yang of drafting, which is this balance between what you were saying, trying to find players that we think are mispriced on our edges and we want to press, like a Jordan Addison, and understanding value. This is the main reason anyone who's sharp understands you don't just draft Jordan Addison in round 5 if you think he's a round 5 player. You don't give up multiple rounds of value. You have to be willing to lose him to somebody else who is excited as you are about him. But you do have to try to get the best prices on all the players because the market element is so important. It also helps you build stronger teams.
Yep.
But I mean, this market element is so important. It was heavily a part of, I know we're not talking running backs, but I wrote about the running back dead zone when I was back at CBS several years ago.
Great article.
That's the piece.
That's why you're a thought leader right there, man.
Yeah, running back dead zone article. But that is, I still get asked about the dead zone, and people say the dead zone no longer exists, and there's been running back shifts and this and that in ADP, and all of that's true. One of the central parts of my original research that I think still very much applies is that the running backs that go in the first 3 rounds or so before the dead zone, there's a market element. It's the players. It's not just the players that are projected for the most volume. There's not really stats or anything. It's the players that we know and we've seen are good enough. And everyone is like, this guy's good enough to go this high. So the thing about the dead zone and the ones that do end up hitting are usually young, unproven players where the
Yes.
market's not really sure what they are.
Like
But the
Ramondre
ones that
Stevenson this year is going in the dead zone.
we know what he is, and the market's telling you he's a dead zone back. He's not good enough to go high enough to not be a dead zone back. That's what the data, I went through 15 years of data. That's what the data, and so one of the other really interrelated things that this gets back to Xavier Worthy and we want to talk about is aggregate data and cohort analysis. And I used it for the running back dead zone, but it's really difficult in cohort and aggregate data it's really easy to misapply the aggregate to the specific is one line that I like to use. And when I went through all that, I looked at all of the specific pieces of data that went into the aggregate so I could really understand what the aggregate trends were telling me. And I know you do this kind of stuff all the time because you do a lot of really good cohort analysis, but you're understanding there's context there. There's a lot of people that just grab all the data, throw it in an average, and then say, because of this, then this. And that's you're missing so much. And the biggest thing you're missing is that fantasy football is about finding outliers. Everything that we're doing here is to try to find players that are unique, that are league winners. There's like 5 players every year that decide all of this. Like it really does come down. I mean, it's not that simple.
It's
but
exciting and discouraging at the same time.
Right, it is. And so when we talk about a guy like Xavier Worthy, the reason that I'm so intrigued, I know some people, you were talking about how cheap he is. Some people might look at that and go, there's still a lot of opportunity costs at ADP, even 60 or whatever. The reason I'm so intrigued by Xavier Worthy is that you can't give me a cohort that is the fastest 40 time in NFL history, playing with Patrick Mahomes and all of these other elements with the young production. There's no comparable for Xavier Worthy. People like to say the fast guys tend to bust. None of them had Xavier Worthy's production profile. Not even close. So he's a completely
age adjusted was strong. Xavier Worthy right out of the gate was good in college.
Being an outlier doesn't immediately mean you're going to be a league winner, but it does mean that the things that people are knocking Xavier Worthy for probably fail from an imagination standpoint to understand how outliers can progress. The other best example of this, again, I know it's a wide receiver show and I keep going around and around. Everything comes back to Brock Bowers this year. I'm so sick of hearing about elite tight end cohort data. There's been like 30 elite tight end seasons in fantasy history. You've been playing as long as me. You know that tight ends didn't go high until like 2011-ish when Gronk and Graham, they started to finally start going high. You have the Gronk career, you have the Graham career, you have the Kelsey career, you have seasons for like Andrews and Kyle Pitts went up there. But people are comparing Brock Bowers to a very small sample of cohort analysis when Brock Bowers is clearly, objectively an outlier already. He was from his freshman year in college when he was dominating Ladd McConkey, Adonai Mitchell, and Jermaine Burton on a national championship team at the highest level of competition at the age-adjusted production. And then he got better in yards per game his second year and his third year. All of his collegiate age-adjusted stuff is unheard of for a tight end. We have different metrics for tight ends for like breakout as prospects for like breakout levels and stuff because tight ends don't usually produce at the level of a receiver in college. Brock Bowers was insane. And then he stepped on the field as a rookie and had more catches than any rookie ever at any position, more than Puka Nacua, who had just set the record the year prior, who broke Anquan Bolden's rookie record for receptions in a season. This is the clearest outlier of all time, I think. I mean, this guy is on a Hall of Fame trajectory, and it's not weird to say that after one season. It's super comfortable.
But to your point, it's really not after one season. It's because you're keeping the context of what he did in college. And I will say in the rookie supermodel over at FantasyLife, the biggest component is age-adjusted production. Like, it's massive. Now, I adjust for the team they played on. I adjust for the competition they had. I adjust for their quarterback. There's all sorts of adjustments I'm doing in the supermodel, but by far the biggest thing is what's happening on an age-adjusted, the age-adjusted component, right? And then obviously draft capital at the end gets baked in, and that's a big part. A team invested in someone. They believe in them. That means we know that they want to give them opportunities, which is, that's just part of that's the name of the game, right? So if you spend a lot of money on something, you're likely going to use it in your personal life. Teams are the same way. They want to use the things they spend a lot of money on. They're more likely to discard the cheap things, right? More quickly. And so the draft capital really does matter. But, Worthy, I think, is really interesting because like you have this kind of jumping off point, to bring it back to like the big picture on talent. So I think we're really aligned in the fact that like we are looking at what these players did in their collegiate career. Another person that does an excellent job at this, guys, is JJ Zachariason, and he has his year 2 model where he's taking into account what the players, did in college and then what they did in year 1, and then he's giving you really this is where the player set. So if you haven't checked out JJ's work, obviously most of you probably have, but if you haven't, I mean, come on, it's JJ Zachariason. He does really great work. So he has kind of a similar approach to this. What I want to talk about, one, I do have a point where I do keep their college production in mind, right? But I do think there's a point where like it obviously starts to diminish, right? In years 1, 2, and 3, I think it's so much more important. I do also think that there is this moment where what I found with a lot of the late breakouts, and I don't want to run, I'm going to have Rich Rebar on tomorrow, guys. So you get 2 episodes and it's wide receiver week. You get Ben Gretch and freaking Rich Rebar. You guys are so lucky. But one of the things that I noted was the late breakouts. A lot of times it was due to injury early in career, which you talked about, and now they've gotten better from. Number 2, you had some sort of organizational change that just really, it hurt them. They suddenly became less valued, right, in the eyes of the team, that now the new guys coming in, the new boss has to make their impression. But the biggest thing was getting a change, a fresh start, man. Sometimes you just need a fresh start on life. I know whenever I was like 24, 25 years old, the job I was in, like I was doing really good at it, but man, I did not like my manager. And it's the only boss ever in my career that I didn't like. But it was oppressive, man. I needed a fresh start. It started to impact my performance. I'm a highly driven freaking person, but I got to where I didn't feel like getting up and going to work in the morning, guys. Like this can just happen. And these are young people. I was 24, 25 at this time. Like we don't have the experiences that we have today. I'm essentially an old man at this point. I got kids closer to the age I was talking about than what I am. So it's this change of environment, and it could be a quarterback shakeup. It could be your quarterback's been injured and now your quarterback's healthy. Look at Devontae Adams as a great example. I know he's an outlier, but we're talking about outliers. The year before, Aaron Rodgers, year 4, played half the games. Year 5, but the underlying data points were pretty good for Devontae. Then you get Aaron Rodgers back, he goes off. So with these late breakouts that have the draft capital, a lot of times it is Emmanuel Sanders going to play with Peyton Manning. It's Doug Baldwin, getting to step up because Golden Tate leaves to go to the Detroit Lions.
I just want to
Golden Tate now getting to play with Matthew Stafford.
I just want to point out that you're doing the exact thing that I was giving you credit for, where you have the aggregate and kind of cohort trend that you're looking at, but you've also dug into the individual data points and you're referencing them all. And so you understand why the trend is what it is, and that it's not just kind of some kind of relic that's maybe leading you astray a little bit.
And you also have to acknowledge, so I looked at the whole group. For 54% of the players that got this change that met the criteria, it was 57%, I think. It mattered. That also, guys, means 43% of them, it still didn't matter. But depending on where you're getting to draft them, right? If you're getting to draft them as a round 8 or 9 player, and there's like kind of, and it doesn't work exactly this way. We can't say that means, there's a 50% chance they're going to hit. We're just referencing historical data. That doesn't mean it predicts to the future that way. But if you're getting them at round 8 or 9, then it's worth it. I think this could honestly be huge for George Pickens this year. You kind of get smothered by the Arthur Smith stuff. You haven't really had a quarterback. We've got underlying data points that tell us George Pickens is a talented player, right?
Very talented. Yes.
Yeah. Like if we look at Pickens, like I'll just scroll down real quick, guys, and I'm going to pull up, we're going everywhere, but this is what we said we would do. Why don't I work smarter, not harder? And
he came to mind when you asked me at the top who the biggest value was. I think he should. People are like, well, what's the difference between the gap between him and T. Higgins? I think he's just a better pick than T. Higgins.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is like, I think he's like T. Higgins, like arbitrage, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
But if you look at this, and we haven't even gotten into all these things yet, man, like some of the things that I'm using as far as talent indicators beyond the fantasy points per game. But we talked about earlier, okay, you see the car on the lot. You're like, it's okay. But then you look under the hood and you're like, oh man, like this is a 6.2 liter. It's got this, that, and these other things, whatever the thing that you're into, it's got these things. George Pickens, okay, 27% of the first downs for the Steelers. Now, I like looking at first downs because it gives you added context, really honestly, of being able to work multiple layers of the field. Because we don't want guys that just go deep, and we don't want guys that just stay at the line of scrimmage. We want guys that can show up in the big moments. We want guys that can help produce first downs. Target share, 26%. And so these are color-coded guys. And I didn't show you the first one, or you saw it earlier, but and some of you are like, I'm listening to your show, I can't even see this. Dwayne, stop talking about colors. But 26% target share, like that is excellent. His yards per route run, 2.06, like that's wide receiver 2 territory, but that's playing with lackluster quarterbacks, guys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, George Pickens has never played. Now Russell Wilson had a solid stretch last year. I will give Russell Wilson credit for that. Played better than what we had seen in the 2 previous years from him. But then also 44% of the air yards. So you've got a guy that can get first downs. You've got a guy that can get down the field, right? Touchdown upside, like what Ben was talking about earlier. You've got this opportunity to really score from anywhere. And if you watch George Pickens, like he's also great with the ball in his hands after the catch. Like this guy is, he's got an attitude. Like he's playing with an absolute freaking edge. And now he's going to come to a team that I have projected for 2 extra games worth of dropbacks over the Steelers. Yeah. So while he's going to pick up CeeDee Lamb as target competition, he's going to be on a team that's going to throw the ball 2 extra. He gets 2 extra games essentially that he gets to play versus what he had with Arthur.
He's in a better situation this year than last year, even with CeeDee Lamb, because there's no wide receiver. This is another team where the wide receiver 3 and beyond are just not guys that are going to really earn volume. Jalen Tolbert really struggled last year. Kevontae Turpin's an interesting sort of like role player. They got it, brought in Jaden Blue. Jake Ferguson's not like a huge target earner. Like the other guys that are running routes, it's gonna mostly be Lamb and Pickens. The one sort of minor negative in that whole profile, you mentioned the yards per out run, kind of more wide receiver 2 territory, if you will. I think significantly improves. He's shown the ability to be really efficient, but one of the biggest ways he wins is as a vertical player, and that can help the efficiency spike. He has a 206 despite the fact that he was the only show in town last year, and safeties are rolling over the top of him constantly. You're trying to win downfield with questionable quarterback play. Russell Wilson had some good moments, as you said, but also the ability for teams to constantly double you down the field where you win. This is the context of the George Pickens profile that I think is why I'm bullish on him being more efficient. You go now to CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, that hurts your target share. It's going to help your efficiency. The way that Pickens wins, Lamb's going to open those one-on-one opportunities up. I mean, that's going to be so beneficial.
And I don't think either of us are honestly that big on Jake Ferguson. Like, I think Jake Ferguson's fine. I'm kind of surprised the Cowboys gave him the contract they gave him. Not trying to knock the guy, but I think Jake Ferguson is a fine NFL tight end. I think where the Cowboys drafted him, they definitely got value for him. But now they've paid him. He's not a great tight end. He's not. Could still completely just roll through Pickens and through what we have with CeeDee Lamb. So I think there's this chance that it's really like, okay, Lamb's the leader, but is Pickens really going to lose that much target share? I think there's a scenario where he could still be 23, 24% target share. And one final thing, and why this is the first year I brought this first down stuff in, and it kind of helps because you'll notice on some of these other profiles like Jamison Williams, who's actually another guy I really like, guys, because people are assuming he can't take a step forward. It's kind of the Jordan Addison conversation. Didn't break out as early, but did break out really in a big way. And his target competition early in college was Ohio State. And then he transferred to Alabama to do his thing. So like, again, context really matters. But if you look at him, a first down rate of 20%, and he's got the air yards, but with Pickens, like still getting 27% of his team's first downs, right? And that high air yard share, it shows that like when you need a player to work in that intermediate area, right? It's still I think that's part of what this signal is actually, picking up. So Pickens is one I would really say. And again, kind of back to the whole idea of the first point being, how good are these players in college? How long do you hang on to that? Right. But part of late breakouts can really tie over to these guys that get a change of scenery. And again, George Pickens, like he hasn't given you a wide receiver 1 season or anything, but he's given you wide receiver 3 seasons, and he's still really young. Like, so if we're keeping it simple, like just from a fantasy standpoint, fantasy points per game. So I want to scroll back up here real quick though, Ben. I want to get your thoughts. So we've talked again about the college. We've talked about how much we care about that. And we're going to get into the age curve stuff here in a second. But the first thing that I wanted to look at is just these data points that I'm essentially scrolling past. There we go. All right. So I've got which wide receiver stats matter the most. And obviously context is like this huge thing, but this is just very simple, guys. All I've done here is I've gone back to 2014 through 2024, a minimum of 350 routes. People ask, why 350 routes? Because that's where most of these data points actually really stabilize. You could do it at 250, but at 350, like you're getting really quality data. So it excludes guys that didn't get this many routes. If they didn't run that many routes the next year, I don't count that against them. So they're just pulled out of the sample. Okay. So these are the guys that had 350 in a year and then 350 in the next year. And if we look at this, fantasy points per game, if we look at correlation to next season's fantasy points, okay, so 0.76, it's the top one. And so we've already talked about that. So I think it's fine. It's one, don't forget it, guys. We sometimes get so in the weeds with this stuff that we ignore it. But then the next two things below it. So now we're talking about, okay, let's look under the hood of what's going on with fantasy points per game. First down share and target share. And I think they're really, complementary, to one another. There's definitely overlap in these two. The other thing I do is I test these things against one another. Like, how highly correlated are they to each other? Because you don't want to be double counting. You're really trying to find some strong data points you want to use to create your profiles that are complementary, right, to one another. But first down share, target share at 0.73. So those are the next things. And then the last two things, yards per route run, 0.66. And then air yard share is 0.64. And guys, I have a sickness. I've researched everything I can get my hands on. You can actually, I'll just throw it on the screen. Why not? At this point, now we're actually looking at R squared numbers. So the coefficient of determination. So they'll be a little lower than your correlations, but still you get the basic idea. This is again, 2014 to 24. Next year, N+1 means the next year versus the previous year for fantasy points. PPR fantasy points obviously is the highest. But guys, I've looked at all this stuff. ESPN Yak, like ESPN catch score, open score, first downs per route run against zone, man, everything. And so ultimately, like, there's a lot of really good context in here. But ultimately where I've landed, with my process, Ben, is that these are the primary factors that I use, along with what you talked about, what they did in the rookie supermodel. That's like how I'm handling the prospects. And then I'm looking at what they're doing at the NFL with these data points. What are your thoughts here? Anything I'm missing? Anything you don't like? Anything?
No, I think this stuff is incredibly important to understand. To your point about context mattering, well, there's one minor thing that I thought was really interesting as you're talking about the cohort. You said it had to be 350 routes both years. There's probably players that ran 350 routes, and then because they were poor in some of these stats, they lost playing time, as we talked about. Those guys, like Ray McLeod is a candidate for that. He came to mind.
Yeah.
Ran a ton of routes last year. The Falcons are super concentrated. Had some production. If you go look at his like per route stuff, it was mostly just all routes volume. As you were saying earlier on, routes doesn't mean a player's good necessarily. And they're talking about maybe Kadarius Hodge will play or what have you. It may be McLeod again. But if he falls out of your data sample, I'm curious if there's a reason in his data that would show that. And so even just like, my point is, even just building the cohort, you have to make decisions, and that can influence some of the correlation elements, of course. The second thing though, is like more broadly, when you were showing those R squared numbers, I think it's incredibly important information. I want to know all of that. The reason I want to know all of that is you are right. You have looked at absolutely everything. You're showing so many stats on screen here for people who are just listening to the audio. And the very best fantasy points is a 0.6 R squared or 0.58. And then behind that, you're at 0.54. What that means is that 40%, the one minus that number, essentially, of the variance is unexplained. So that means that 0.6% or 0.58 or whatever of the variance from one year to the next is explained by the stat. It means that 40% is unexplained by this stat.
Yep.
which the argument that I would make is you've looked at everything you can possibly look at, and you can't find anything that's actually super predictive. What we wind up doing in the fantasy space a lot that I worry about is, well, I think some people do, is they say this is the best stat, but you're the best of, I mean, yeah, I know in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, but you're the best of a lot of relatively not very predictive stats, or not like extremely predictive. I'm not saying these are low R squareds. They are somewhat predictive, but the point is there's a reason.
In another industry, people would look at this and laugh.
Yes,
Like,
exactly. And even in other sports like baseball, they're able to project stats forward better because they have the one-on-one interaction of a pitcher and a hitter. And it is actually easier for those stats to be, there's less context on all of the stats. And so it's easier for them to stabilize in those things. And so you look at a sport like football and you try to keep in mind that this cohort data is very, very important. The other thing is this data is pretty ubiquitous now. People like yourself who have done incredible work on it for years, it's in the market. It's in ADPs. People are aware of the stats that matter. There's a lot of people that pay attention to this stuff. That's not to say that it doesn't matter. But where I think a lot of the edge can come in is trying to understand the 40% of unexplained variance. A lot of people don't want to wade into that. They want everything to be, and that's the context matters element, right? But they want everything to be provable in data. If I can't prove it, if I don't have the data and the correlation data that shows that this is an important metric that I need to pay attention to, then it doesn't matter. And that's fine if that's your process. I would argue that most of that is baked into ADP already because of where we're at with data just generally in society in 2025. And your best chance to actually win at fantasy and find key numbers is to understand everything Dwain's saying. It's very, very important to understand it, but then try to understand the individual players that could be the outliers or the reasons that there isn't a higher correlation coefficient or whatever. I'm coefficient of determination, you called it. I'm not up on my statistics.
That's R squared, yes. Yeah. But
Yeah.
Correlation coefficient is what we now have up on the screen.
Right. So the reason that we can't get higher numbers there, what is the reason for that? What are the layers of things? And I think that goes into everything else we talked about earlier around the fact that everything is interrelated, that there's so much context, that there are injuries. There's like one of the reasons that you did 350 routes over 2 years is if you didn't do that, you wouldn't just get the Ray McLeods that lost playing time for performance reasons, which I'm sure you would love to include in your sample. You'd get a ton of players who lost playing time for injury reasons, and then you're not getting signal. It requires so much more understanding of the individual.
350 is like not a huge number.
It's not.
So
I think it's a great. It's the best you can do for sure.
But
that's the point. Is
your point? It's tough to choose the cutoff.
Right. Yeah. We can't be perfect. I think that's the best way you could set that up genuinely. And I see why you chose about that number. It's a really strong area of route. I've done a lot of work with, week to week numbers and seasons and things for players that run a ton of routes. It doesn't necessarily have to be the whole season to get to 350 routes. For lower volume offenses, they're all going to clear 350 routes, but players that miss meaningful amount of time, you do probably want to not have in when you're trying to figure out this particular point of like the per game stuff and those things. How much does it correlate from year to year? You do want a decent sample in both years. So totally understand why you're doing that. The point that I'm just making is that it's incredibly hard to get to a point where the data that we do have is all encompassing, which is not the way that you use it. You obviously, as we've talked through some of the plays and some of the ways that you actually break down the players, you use this stuff as a foundational element. And so I feel the same way about it. And one of the things I love that you put in the show sheet as we're preparing, you were talking about some of the data pitfalls. And one of the notes that you mentioned here is this idea of like the greatest newest stat ever that basically tells us the same thing as the stat we already have. You noted it as double counting. I think there's multiple issues with it, but the double counting thing is so true. I constantly get feedback that's like, why aren't you higher on this player? He has all of these things. And I'm like, all of those things are relative to like basically one stat. And in some cases it's a few plays. Like one of the things that I always get, I do a little bit of the pulling out the biggest play out of a sample. And people love to be like, you can't do that. You can't. Those are the plays that matter the most. You can't pull out the biggest play out of a sample. What are you doing? You're not allowed to do that because people have shown before that's not something you actually want to do. And if you do that, you need to do that on every player. But my point in doing it is mostly, I do think you have to be careful when you do that kind of stuff and you have to understand what you're doing. But mostly any of these stats have context and are not perfect. And people start using splits data. They start doing all sorts of things with the data that probably makes it impossible to really get perfect signal out of it. So the guy I would bring up in this point that I'm saying about pulling out individual players that I think is aggressively overvalued, and I'm probably wrong because of his preseason week 1 usage, but is Marvin Mims, who's going right behind the sort of wide receiver cutoff where you start to get into more veterans, like the cutoff for good rookie upside plays or good players that we know are good veterans, which is usually around like round 8 to round 10. Mims goes in that next group where I think you can kind of push anyone up. But he goes like on underdog. He's going like a pick 125 or something. He goes meaningfully high.
He's moving
round
past
11
that now, though. Yeah,
yeah. And so he has this really good per route data, 2.5 yards per route run, all of this stuff. One of the stats that I've used that is breaking a lot of good statistical rules because I'm not being careful with the way that I'm parsing data. But he had 3 plays last year of 50 plus yards. That's a really tough thing to do. There's only like a few receivers in the entire league that had that. One of them was a 93-yard touchdown where he got deep. The 3 plays combined for nearly 200 yards. He ran fewer than 200 routes. Those 3 plays are responsible for more than 1.0 of his 2.5 yards per route run. Again, a big player taking out the biggest plays is not the right way to do it. You can't just say
that was where I was actually going to have my question for you is like, again, going back to the college profile. The rookie supermodel was actually pretty high on Mims. Now, Mims was one of these players that broke out way early. Was a great prospect, goes to Oklahoma, like right out of the gate, puts up massive numbers that are honestly just hard to repeat, like for the rest of your collegiate career. We see this happen sometimes with players. He was still good, but if you look at Mims and like his profile, like he's this smaller, fast guy that just plays bigger than he is vertically down the field. Like he can win contested catches. And his go-to thing in college was the deep crosser. Like he would just get lost. The safeties would lose him and the scheme would work out where he'd be wide open. And once he would get the ball, like he's doing his thing. So a couple of those plays were down the sideline last year, but there were two big plays down the middle from Bo Nix to him. Then there was a lot
one was
of
just
stuff.
A swing pass because he got a lot of those
passes.
But one was down the middle. I know what you're talking about. I think it was the
it might have been the
Browns
game. It might have Browns or Bengals. Yeah. But my point being is like he actually did have a collegiate profile that said he could do these things. His collegiate profile honestly was very similar to Xavier Worthy. Lots of stuff around the line of scrimmage, a lot of things deep. Both of them broke out immediately upon their arrival to school. Things faded off a little bit for them. They were both still good, right? But just not as good as what we saw very early in their career. So I do find that one interesting.
That's why I brought it up and that's why I said I could be wrong. I think it's a great point, and that's context I definitely wanted to mention. But the context around the fact that he ran fewer than 200 routes is also really relevant. And this point you made about players changing teams, sometimes needing a change of scenery. My issue with Mims, who was a young, like early declare as well, and has been young through his first 2 years of his career as well. He fits that like he's only 23 now, trajectory stuff. My issue with him is they took him in the second round. They have every incentive to use him. When his production started to hit last year and his route scaled up, that meant for him getting to route participation rates of about 40%. He never ran more than 50% of the routes in a game all season. Most of that was actually, not most of it, but a good percentage of that was running routes out of the backfield because they didn't trust the other running back. So they started to use Mims as their swing pass, like backfield explosive play option, which Sean Payton has used. Sean Payton's had all these conversations about the Joker. In some ways, he made Marvin. He keeps saying it's a running back or a tight end. In some ways, he made Marvin Mims his Joker. I know, but in some ways, he made Marvin Mims the Joker as this backfield guy that he was getting early first read targets to that were basically designed screens. And so, like I'll go to Matt Harmon's reception perception note. That's something I saw a clip from, and I tweeted it out the other day, where he talked about I think 30% of his snaps or something in the sample that he looked at were in the backfield, and a massive number of his targets came on designed screen plays. And so people talk about like the manufactured touches with Xavier Worthy. It's a really good comp. But the problem is for Mims is he legitimately didn't get an opportunity to run any other routes other than just screen or backfield routes or straight go routes. And so that's when I start talking about like the change of scenery stuff is like, I think Marvin Mims is really, really good. I don't think Sean Payton actually does. He was 5th on the team in routes and he played every game. He didn't miss time at wide receiver. Sorry, fifth wide receiver on the team in routes. Devon Vele ran more routes. Lil Jordan Humphrey, who's actually big, these guys have size, ran more routes. Troy Franklin, who was not a very good rookie necessarily, ran more routes. Mims did run 16 of 19 routes at the first team in the first preseason game. That's why I'm probably wrong. But when I look at the context around him last year, what I can't get over is for all the things that we actually do really like about him, why he didn't run more routes, but then also specifically the point that we were making about, or the point that I was making about pulling out these big plays, is I absolutely think it's wrong to act like his 2.5 yards per route run last year would have ported over to a larger route sample.
Yeah.
The fact that it was sub
I
200 routes is so important because he wasn't asked to do the things. You can't run 400 routes the way he ran routes. You can't run 400 screen routes. And so if he would have ran 400 plus routes last year, and really you want to be at 500 plus probably, and he's at 200. People talk about Jaden Reed didn't run a lot of routes last year. He was just under 400. Mims is half of that. So it's a very different discussion about how his efficiency tends to lead to volume and all that, but how that ports over, he has to do entirely different things for his routes to rise. And so can he even win at those things? Why hasn't he gotten the opportunity to do them through 2 years in Sean Payton's offense? My read on that is Sean Payton thinks he can't do those things. So now the fact that he was running them in the first preseason game is exciting to see. But if he would have ran 400, 500 routes last year, the other 200 to 300 that we didn't see, that Sean Payton didn't think he was good enough to run, are different types of routes than the ones that created his explosive plays, which were vertical or design touches. And he would have had to go out and run in the intermediate and win on different types of routes. Maybe he runs a lot more vertical routes. I'm not entirely sure how this would like perfectly manifest, but I do think the point about him not getting particular type of usage is relevant to, again, this is a player that all the data says that we should think is good, but I think the context is still not really there with the routes volume. So it's a really, really tricky one.
Yeah. I think this is one though, where we just have to pay attention though. Like, let's see what happens in the next preseason game. Like he's a player where like what you're hearing from camp and things like that, it matters a lot. There's some players where I don't need to hear anything from camp, honestly. Like I'll listen, my ears are always open, but a lot of it's like in one ear, out the other. It's like, I know what I know about this player. I have strong convictions about it.
I don't need to know anything more about Chris Olave. Oh, he rolled his ankle a little bit. Like he's really good. I know his quarterbacks are probably really bad.
But Mims is an interesting one because he was a good prospect in college. It's pretty much wide open right now for the wide receiver 2 role. And he is young enough where I don't think we can rule out the fact that he could get better. He could have worked on the things that he needed to in the offseason. And now Sean Payton is saying, hey man, I see you. I see what you did.
He said that
and
last offseason. Sean Payton was saying that last offseason.
Sean Payton, you can't listen to Sean Payton about anything. Sean Payton, I don't know how he ranks on the Coach Speak Index. I really don't even care. That's not against Coach Speak Index.
Yeah,
I just don't.
No, he's the one dude. Yeah.
But but here's the thing though. Marvin Mims is a player that can win in these certain ways for a coach that loves to do these trinkety things. So if he did find himself suddenly on the field for 80% of the routes, and he still gets those sort of looks, plus just an additional 15% target share on normal routes,
right?
He would be a really good player.
He would, but this is why I'm emphasizing the big play element as well, because the biggest reason we're in on him is that he did have like a 2.5 yards per route run last year, and it looks incredible. And that goes back to the prospect profile, but he wasn't necessarily great as a rookie. And the biggest reason he had 2.5 yards per route run last year is that, yes, everybody has explosive plays, but his explosive plays were extremely explosive, including a 90 plus yard catch in 2 more 50 plus yard plays on a 200 route sample, and elevates his yards per route a full yard. If you took the 3 biggest plays for every receiver in the league over a minimum, I would probably, I mean, I'm not certain. I'd probably bet pretty confidently that his yards per route run goes up the most for his 3 biggest plays, because there's not a lot of guys that have 350 plus yard plays, period, and not on 196 routes or whatever it was, especially, which is not the whole story. I completely agree with you that there's a lot more to it, and there's this possibility that he can develop and grow more.
And to be clear, like, I haven't drafted a ton of Mims, but the 80% at least has me open to mixing him in.
Yeah.
Because he
He's
is still young and he could still improve. And while the yards per route run, I totally agree with where you're coming from. Like, again, like he has big playability in his collegiate profile. Does that mean that he's going to score 350 yarders again? Probably not. Even if he has a full, maybe if he was an 85% route player, we would hope he would get 3 of those. Right. And he did it last year on way less work. But I think just the fact that he's still young enough, like for me, keeps the door open. And if he gets another game like that with the starters where he's out there playing those routes, like I'll probably get a little bit more exposure, to him. Obviously the
and I
price is going
probably
to
will
go up
too.
again.
Yeah, I think it's a great
but
point.
this next game, we could see the opposite. The other thing, Sean Payton's notorious, man, for rotating one of his wide receiver spots. Like he's done it for years. So we could actually see him that could have also been Mims. We're giving you your shot this week with the starters. And then next week, it could be Troy Franklin. Next week, it could be one of the other players. So you have to be really careful not to overreact. I think the way the market's reacting right now is probably fine. Like he's, what has he moved up right now? Like over right now. And
one little note, I just dug into it because I've been harping this point so much. But there were 10 receivers in the entire NFL last year.
He's up 4 spots on Underdog on the last week. That's not too bad.
No, the 10 receivers in the entire NFL, 10 players in the entire NFL that had 350+ yard plays. Only 4 that had more than 3. And those are, that's Terry McLaurin. We would have guessed that. Brian Thomas, Jamison Williams, Jamar Chase. Alec Pierce is the one other, kind of curious name on this list, but CeeDee Lamb, JD Reed, Jaden Reed, Nico Collins, and Xavier Worthy. It's like all the best deep threats in the league, or big play guys, or just generally really good wide receivers. I'm not saying that Marvin Mims can't back that up. I'm just saying like contextual, like if the whole reason we're in on this dude is his yards per out run from last year, it's not the whole reason, but if that's a big part of it, you got to understand where his yards per out run came from. And so this is a weird tangent to get us on, Dwayne, because we're kind of laying the case for, long view and talent and all these things. I think Marvin Mims is really talented. It just came to mind because you're talking about how guys break out after they change teams. And I'm like, Marvin Mims is good. Mims? Yeah. It's going to be Mims on a second team.
Is that going to be Jalen Coker?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think it's just like, and it's another thing we have on the show sheet, like how much do we care about preseason? How much do we care about training camps? And it's, again, context matters for certain teams where we know we've got this wide open battle going on for the wide receiver 2 role. It matters, and so we could totally flip flop this next weekend and it could be, like I said, Troy Franklin. But I think for now, for me, Mims is young enough, and I'm actually with you on what you're talking about with the yards per route run. It's one component, of what he did, but really it's more about what was his early talent profile and could he finally be getting it? Maybe he did work on becoming this better player, and that's why he got rewarded with more routes.
But that was my point about ADP too. He's going at like 120, and that's where I was talking about. People get really into the like per route data. I'd make the Mims bet at like pick 160. I have a hard time when you're taking him in the 10th or the 11th round, and I don't even know if he's going to run 300 routes. You better be really sure that he is. That's 197 routes or whatever is a very small number of routes to be taking a guy in the 11th round in best ball.
Well, you're kind of hitting on something we also had in the show notes, right? With the data pitfalls and the challenges and the questions and the small samples. Last year, the example of this was Dontavian Wicks. This year, the example of this is Marvin Mims. And historically going back, like some of these things have hit, some of these things have not, but it's definitely not, a perfect science. And I do think, to your point, when you get to these small sample players, it's something you have to look at with the big plays. So you're talking about Marvin Mims right now, like you said, going, there he is. This is consensus. So consensus, guys. So if you're drafting ESPN, Yahoo, these other places, Mims is more in a range where, like, Ben, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but you would be a little more okay with him. Like at pick 150, right? You said sure. 160.
Yeah.
If you look on Underdog right now, he's up 3.6 spots since the preseason route participation. Look at Keenan Allen right behind him with a 38 spot jump. Marvin Mims going pick 125. But that's also a symptom of wide receivers going so much earlier on underdog.
Right.
They're all going earlier, right? He's still like on underdog. If I sort this by underdog,
but Mims is a way better play in redraft. He should be going higher on the redrafts. Even controlling for the receiver stuff. I'd be
he's
terrified.
wide receiver 58 on underdog. That's still, I mean, you're talking about that's pretty low, man.
There's a lot of dudes that have a lot more. I mean, I know guaranteed route volume isn't the only thing, but there's a lot of dudes that have a lot.
I like Kyle Williams over him.
I do.
I mean,
yeah.
I like Kyle Williams over him. I think there's a clear path to Kyle Williams, like just being a star right out of the gate. I know he was a late riser in the draft process. Supermodel, he wasn't great in the supermodel, but there were a lot of things that it liked about him. The Patriots are very into him. It's a wide open. They need playmakers, right? It's Travion and Kyle Williams season.
I'll give you a name that I'm curious your thoughts on, but I would take Wan'Dale Robinson over him very easily. Wan'Dale Robinson's a guy who can earn a ton of volume, go back to his prospect profile, earns a ton of volume, doesn't necessarily have a huge efficiency, and that's why people don't like him in half PPR. They're just starting to play him outside a little bit, or they're talking about it. I don't think the efficiency has to be as bad as it was last year. It was still low, but better in the first two seasons. When I say efficiency, I'm referring to like yards per target, after the target yardage efficiency. But this is a guy who had 140 targets last year and is going way behind Mims, has way more route certainty, less competition for targets. The other issue with Mims with his routes scaling up is they do still have Troy Franklin, who ran more routes last year. They do still have Devon Vele. Then they drafted Pat Bryant. Then they signed a tight end in Evan Ingram, before Pat Bryant, but they signed a tight end in Evan Ingram, who's going to factor into the routes discussion for the receivers. And Peyton loves to use rotations outside of his one main X receiver. So there's a long-term trend here as well where, Sutton's going to get the routes. Last year, the number 2 wide receiver or tight end on the entire team was Devon Vele at 315 routes. Nobody got to the 350 route cutoff other than Sutton that you were referencing.
And that is historically something Sean Payton has done.
He does
I tend to believe that if he had a really good wide receiver, he would just play them. It's all this.
But then he doesn't get to say he's the smartest guy in the world for scheming up all these different formations.
Yeah, and for his subterfuge on draft day. Yeah, I got them worried about taking this guy so we could get this other guy. Anyway, Sean Payton, we love you as much as you love yourself. We're good with you for fantasy football. Wan'Dale's interesting. I'm not too into him. I agree with everything you said. Now, here's the thing: like he goes 50 picks after Mims on underdog.
That's what I'm talking about.
Are you with? I honestly think that Darius Slayton is the better fit, though, for what Russ wants to do.
I like that.
Wan'Dale, my concern is like Russ Wilson working the intermediate and short game, unless it's off of designed sort of plays where you move him out. And then, you've got the receiver like escaping from a backside or whatever. And it's like just this little flip, but true, just straight dropbacks, reading the middle of the field. Honestly, we get a little bit of Kyler Murray.
Yeah, he's pretty bad.
He's not great at that. Whereas Slayton,
they can't see. They're just too short.
It's a problem. It's a problem. I mean, when guys in front of you, look, you could be 6'1" or 6'2", and sometimes it could be a problem. These guys in front of you are 6'6". Like, so it's an issue, but when you're Drew Brees, that's what's so amazing about Drew Brees. Like his ability, and he would talk about it. And when you watch Drew Brees in the pocket, like the way he would bounce, he's bouncing.
He's standing on his tippy toes. His chin was always up. His helmet. I've never seen a quarterback's helmet.
Helmet up. Took some massive shots to the chin on that. Yeah. There are a lot of guys. I have not taken a lot of Marvin Mims. Like I like Cedric Tillman. What he did. I'm not crazy about the quarterback situation, but what Cedric Tillman did in 4 games last year. Obviously, Jameis Winston pumping it up, but things that I watched that were like, okay, this guy's actually good at contested catches. This is a guy that if a quarterback just decided, I'm just going to throw it to Tillman when he gets single coverage, and it's going to work out. Like, there are guys that are like that, right? They're not great separators, but their quarterbacks just trust them. They're like, man, when I see he's got single, I'm just going there. Drake London, like Michael Penix could be great for Drake London this year because it could be like the Jay Cutler, Brandon Marshall experience, which is, there's only one guy on you and it's really tight coverage, but like, you're my guy. I'm just going to throw it.
One of the big things is you're starting to look at some of these other late round receivers and to try to get us back on track, because I went to the one player who probably has the metrics that
We just
suggest
spent
that he's
20 minutes on
good.
Marvin Mims.
Yeah, I know. I really derailed the actual theme of this. But the reason he goes where he does is a lot of the receivers in the later rounds we are more or less demonstrably not good, other than young players. We're mostly only talking about young players who could potentially do something that they haven't shown yet. Wan'Dale Robinson's played a couple years. He had an injury early. Obviously, Tillman got hurt last year right after they traded Amari Cooper and his routes spiked. And so you're looking at guys, maybe he's something better than, and if we kept talking about these guys, I would bring up like Malik Washington, and I'd bring up Jalen Lane and Jalen Royals. And the interesting players to me in the later rounds at wide receiver are players we don't know what they are, because it's similar to some of the like running back dead zone stuff we're talking about earlier, where like we are pretty good at knowing which wide receivers are good. If you look at end of season scoring and who the highest scoring receivers are and where the ceiling comes from, it's the early rounds. It's overwhelmingly the first couple rounds. And if it's not that, then it's the mid rounds. It's the rest of the single digit rounds. Sometimes you get a round 8 guy or a round 5 guy or a round 4 guy who meaningfully steps up and has a big breakout season. Once you get back into these ranges, it is really hard. And that's why I don't really fault anyone for swinging on Marvin Mims. I'm just saying,
I think
his
it can
profile
also, I think it can also be a roster construction sort of thing, right? So if you're sandwiching Mims in, like maybe the way your draft started, for whatever reason, in the first 4 rounds, you took, 3 running backs. It just worked out where like you got massive values. They fell to you. You got 3 running backs in the first 4 rounds. You got a wide receiver in one of those rounds. You're in a 3 wide receiver league. And it kind of forced you into this situation where, you came back and you grabbed a Chris Olave to go with, say, like a JSN in round 3. And then you had to come back with like a Debo or something like that, and maybe you picked up Cooper Kupp,
because you need some
just
routes.
the way, and so you need like some sort of infusion of potential upside.
Yeah.
And as you start to look down your draft board, there are other guys that go after Mims. Kyle Williams is a name. But what you may be now thinking in your head is like, I kind of have my bases covered on like the dudes I know that are going to play and like can at least score some fantasy points, but I need multiple shots at upside. And that might mean you have to start taking those kind of players earlier, even though you may think one may be slightly overvalued as to where they're being priced. So Mims becomes one of them. And then you turn around, you take Kyle Williams as well. Right.
It's a great,
I think
it's a great point about how and when you might take Mims and those guys, but the general thought that a lot of these names back here are uncertain or are known to be not very good, basically, or just routes based plays or things like that, because there aren't a lot.
I'd rather take Mims in a redraft league than Romeo Dobbs.
Yeah. Yep.
In best ball, I think you can make an argument for Dobbs. He's probably going to be on the field because there's so many injuries. The routes are going to be there. He's going to run into some spike weeks you get to use just by being out there, right? Mims could be a complete zero. Like that's in his range of outcomes, that he's a complete zero. In redraft with Mims, I get an early look in the season and I can cut bait. If let's say the rest of the preseason, he is getting this 80% route participation and we buy in, you draft him, come week 1 is 30%. I don't even need to wait. Like I can be okay, bye.
Yeah.
I can't do that in best ball.
Can't do that in best ball, right?
So I think it's not to mean that he can't be a best ball pick, but he needs to be on the certain kind of roster, in my opinion, the way you've constructed the rest of your wide receiver room.
For sure.
Okay. So
circle back to the good receivers though. I've been taking us down we're talking about.
No, it's okay. Just real quick though. So we've hit on like, I think we're in agreement, like the things that matter. We talked about context. So a great example to start with, Jordan Addison. So like target share really matters. Like, and I care about it. I think that target earning is actually a sign of talent. Like if you're not good, if you're not earning targets, you probably aren't good, but the context has to be there of who have you played with? And if you play with Justin Jefferson and you play with TJ Hawkinson and you're a really young player, I think you have to cut some slack for that. And then I also think that the underlying breakout data that you and I have referenced some different things actually show that you should be giving players like that slack based on what we see them do in years 3 and 4. So I just wanted to talk about real quick, like the age curve, because we have talked about it some, but I did this thing called wide receiver prime production. So all I did is I went back and I took the best 3-year span of wide receivers' careers from 2011 to 2024. Okay. And then I compared what they did at different years of experience to their absolute best 3 years. And so guys that are rookies, you're in year one, they typically hit 80% of their 3-year prime. Their max powers, right? Superman without any kryptonite around. This dude's balling out like those best 3 seasons. Okay. Years 2 to 5, and this applies to Jordan Addison. This applies to Jaden Reed. This applies to so many names that we've already mentioned. 93% versus their best 3 years. So that's the spot. Years 2 to 5 are where we get these really big jumps, right? From year one. And so that's something for people to remember. Year 6, you start to get a little bit of a drop off, but it's okay. It's 87%. I would still call that you're still in the prime, right? You're still in that prime range. Year 7, now we're basically back down to where you were as a rookie. 83%. And guys, these are general guidelines for you to use. Please do not take these things and apply them as this is the rule of the way this works. Because if you did this with Davante Adams, if you did this with Mike Evans, if you did this, there are certain guys, and there's survivorship bias going on in these data points as well. But there are certain guys that are just good for a really long time, and they're not bad until they just actually hit an age cliff. But then you see years 8 to 9, 74%, and then years 10 to 11, 65% of their prime, and then year 12 plus 51%. And I wanted to bring this up because where are you at this year? I have not drafted, and it burned me last year. Now, I did have Davante Adams on some teams. He was actually on my team that made it into the final round of Best Ball Mania. I had a team that had Davante Adams on it, and he went berserk, got traded, obviously, to the Jets, and the rest was history with Aaron Rodgers. But where do you stand? We've talked about the early career. We've talked about where the players break out. But how much do you shy away from players, especially like Mike Evans, Davante Adams, names that have been really good for a long time? And it may be a toxic trait for me. I tend to fade them because my thought process is like, I just don't know if it's going to go away or not. And if there are other guys I like in the same range as I'm just going to take them because it's one less risk factor.
That's the biggest reason that I agree with you is the opportunity cost element. I think the best case scenario with those guys who we really know what they are after so many years of production is that you're paying full price for what they are because the market knows what they are. They're valuing them correctly in most cases. And so they don't hit an age cliff. The best case scenario is you get what you paid for. Yeah. The opportunity cost in most cases is that there are players in almost every range of drafts that there's more uncertainty with. And I think people think of uncertainty as a downside, like, oh, we don't know.
Xavier Worthy versus Mike Evans at the 3-4 turn right now in best ball is a great example of this.
Yeah. Xavier Worthy, I think people don't understand. Xavier Worthy could be a first-round pick next year. And I'm not saying that's likely to happen. I think there's a lot of people who are like yelling at their podcast right now when I say that because there's people that are really confident he's not good enough to do that.
Yeah.
And I would just suggest you don't have enough imagination for the way that these things can play out, the way that outliers' careers can play out. It's not impossible for Xavier Worthy for that to happen. Mike Evans can't be a first-round pick next year. And it doesn't matter how good of a year he has. He can't rise, basically. And that doesn't mean
he can. To your point, they most likely hit their value, but Mike Evans is actually a great example last year of actually blowing that out of the water because Chris Godwin ends up getting hurt.
But Evans missed some time last year.
He did miss some time, but down the stretch, right? You were really good with Mike Evans on your team. You were good with just Buccaneers, period. If you had Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving, and Mike Evans, like you basically won your league to finish the season.
You got what you paid for.
Yeah. The thing is, it does, and chaos happens to your point, but it took some things that were kind of out of Mike Evans's control, which I'm not saying is a bad thing because that's going to happen. Week 1 gets here and that stuff's all happening. It's going to be going on everywhere. And we already talked about it with Jordan Addison, a younger player. So we got to give Mike Evans credit for it too. But if Jefferson went down, there's a chance Jordan Addison's a 28% target share player, and he's the wide receiver 4 on the season. Could totally happen for him. So it could still happen for Evans, but my challenge is that cliff right? And we don't always know when it's going to happen. And it can be very sudden and abrupt.
So
You add Emeka Egbuka to the mix, and Chris Godwin will eventually be back.
was Evans going about like the 2-3 turn last year? I'm trying to pull up ADP from last year. I'm trying to remember. Because I
I
was
think he
going to
was
say
more
like
of a mid-third round pick.
mid-third. I think it's relatively similar to Malik Neighbors, right? And I think it's a good point where Evans did produce and you got what you paid for. I'm not saying that Neighbors was necessarily a better pick even, because Evans maybe was more productive last year. Just the fact that Neighbors is going as high as he is this year doesn't only.
No, I took Malik Neighbors every time.
Yeah, I took him too, and
maybe he was a tad aggressive.
The point is, when you're playing fantasy football, even in just a 12-team league, but in these big, Best Ball Mania contests and everything, especially, you need to have the perfect team. In a 12-team league, you need to have the best team out of 12. And so you need to find hits that are meaningfully outproducing their draft value. And so for me, the Mike Evans question that you posed to me,
22.2 points per game from week 13 to 19.
Yeah,
Obviously,
I mean, he
people
was
aren't
great
getting to use that, and they don't get to use week 19 and 18 for fantasy, but still, they broadened his route tree. They let him do all these other things that he normally doesn't get to do, and the guy came through. Obviously, it took like some big things, like he had a 93 utilization score, like, which is pretty insane, guys. It's on a scale of 0 to 100. It's taking mostly all the things that me and Ben have been talking about, and it's a weighted score to help you basically understand like how integrated into the offense is this player. There's also some talent elements mixed in, but I bring it up because like I get questions about it all the time, and I think they're good questions, right? I mean, Mike Evans versus Xavier Worthy. I also put out a disclaimer that I am fairly aggressive when it comes to this stuff, and your personality may not match the way that I draft, to be honest. Like it might give some people anxiety, but I'm most likely taking Xavier Worthy. I will mix in some Mike Evans in something where I'm going to have 150 entries, because I think you got to do it a little bit. But I mean, I'm leaning to Xavier Worthy.
If you're fairly aggressive, then I might be a little insane. But I probably.
Well, I'm going Ted McMillan.
Mike Evans. Yeah, I want to get so much exposure to all of the different choices. So, like in my rankings, I have McMillan and Worthy, and even George Pickens and Jameson Williams ahead of Evans, and then have Evans as sort of denoted as a fade, because I want exposure to all these different players that I think have the potential to have the massive breakout and do something that we haven't seen from them yet. You showed that age curve. The biggest note to me is less about the cliff that the players hit and more about the breakout season. And I think what we're searching for is the year where the player becomes something that is different than what we've seen prior. And people get so fixated on past data. And when we're talking about Jordan Addison and the things he's done up to this point, I'm fixated on what he can do as a 23-year-old, not what he did as a 21-year-old and 22-year-old is great for a 21-year-old and a 22-year-old, but I'm not paying for that. I'm paying for what I think 23-year-old could be. Similar to Jahmyr Gibbs, who I have as my RB1. People are really fixated on the split and the things that have happened in the past. And I'm like, this dude's only 23 and going into his third year, but we know everything about him is very, very strong, the explosive play rate, all that stuff, other than the presence of David Montgomery, which could shift in meaningful ways. And so anyway, that's, he's a running back. I'm derailing the conversation again, but the way that I play is
you're worse than me. I derail conversations. Like you're another level. Like I have mad respect for your game because I do this to Ian and the producers are in my ear. Dwayne, we got to go. We got to get back on track here, and I'm just like on a tangent. So,
but all these I love it.
This is what I like to do.
Yeah, it helps, I think, provide the bigger picture. And one of the things you told me when you mentioned we were going to do a show is the objective is to kind of teach people how to fish. And I think these types of interrelated things across positions are super helpful as well, to understand these concepts of what is it that we're doing? What are we seeking? I think you're seeking the potential for massive ceiling. And like you said, it does give people anxiety to take picks like Xavier Worthy that could be total nothings. I find that you stack enough picks like that, sometimes your teams are bad, but you do usually find some hits. And if you take a lot of, singles or doubles and don't swing for home runs, you're not going to find, like, even when Evans has the end of the year stuff that he had that you mentioned, that outperformed his production expectation probably at his ADP. And I think you're right that he was a good pick for those reasons. But if you take a bunch of picks like that, Evans is like the best case where you got a nice spike week at the right time from a player that we kind of knew what he was. Take a bunch of those types of picks. There are other versions of that pick in the ranges that he went last year.
To what Ben's saying here, guys, especially if you're drafting in home leagues. So this is based on consensus ADP, and you guys are getting a sneak peek to something that hasn't even published yet, right? I'm writing my strategy article for how you should attack wide receiver this year using that consensus ADP. So you're looking at my Google Doc that I'm writing in right now,
Nice.
that I've submitted to the editors. It will be up tomorrow.
Who's that high priority target in all caps?
Jackson Smith-Njigba.
There we go.
So, and we should talk about him because I think some people think I'm nuts that I'm so in on him in round 3, but a lot of it has to do with the age. It has to do with what we just talked about with that age curve.
But finish your point about the rounds 4 to 6. I just derailed you again.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you just did it again. Damn it. All right, so 4 to 6, but the sweet spot, right? Tet McMillan, guys, in your home leagues, pick 66, round 6, okay? You can take multiple swings on these guys. You could start taking these guys in round 5. You don't have to wait until round 6. So what triggered me pulling this up was you talking about stacking as many of these players as you can. Okay. So Tet McMillan is there. Rashee Rice is there. Xavier Worthy's there. Jamison Williams is another one. George Pickens, who we just talked about. All these guys, you could come away with 2 or 3 of them. Okay. You could take, this is actually your in-home leagues where I kind of like coming away with 3 running backs in the first 4 to 5 rounds. And the main reason why is all of these guys. Mm-hmm. And where they're sitting here and where they're sitting on that age curve, what they did as prospects and what the potential is. Like, I feel like you've got this scenario where you could completely just smash your league. I'm not saying don't take CD Lamb in round 1. Like, I'm not saying don't take some of these players, but there's a sweet spot here where you're going to be able to tack on 2 of these guys. Travis Hunter is another one, guys.
Yeah.
People are petrified because he might play defense. I don't care. He was the number 2 pick in the draft, one of the best prospects ever in my model at wide receiver. To Ben's point, you also need to put the rose-colored glasses on. You just need to.
I have, in my rankings, I mark guys targets or fades, and from wide receiver 11 to wide receiver 31-ish, I think it looks like I have 6 targets, and I think you just named all 6 of them. So we're in agreement about this pocket being very fruitful. And then behind wide receiver 31, I think there's another pocket that includes Jordan Addison, that includes Jaden Reed and Josh Downs, and maybe a little bit more expensive, but I like Jerry Jeudy in that range. We talked about Chris Olave. I think those guys are underrated. And then you get the rookies as well. You get
funny you say that.
And Matthew Golden and those guys.
Round 6, and you can start in round 5. And then the next week's sweet spot, if we look at it here, I'm going to resort this for folks by consensus. For those of you that can't see the ADP tool, you can check it out over at FantasyLife.com. But again, this is an aggregate of ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, CBS, Real-Time Sports, Underdog, FFPC. Okay? You can also see Superflex here, but we don't include that in the aggregate. For obvious reasons, it would influence things. And then Guillotine Leagues are also in here. But if you look at that range that you were just talking about, I think that's really the next sweet spot. I mean, Jalen Waddle's another name.
Yep.
Dude, like, great. He had a bad year last year. The whole Dolphins offense was bad. But if you look at the years before that, Waddle was really like, he was a wide receiver 2 pretty much every single year, has underlying data points that tell us he might be a wide receiver 1. Tyreek Hill's getting older. It could be as simple as Tua just playing the whole year. Now, the opposite of that is people immediately say, but Tua's going to miss games. We don't know, guys. We really don't know if Tua's going to miss games. Could he miss games and could it tank you? Yes, but Jalen Waddle's a round 7 pick in your home league. He's going pick 74, right? So he's the beginning of round 7. He's a round 6-7 turn pick, right? I'm doing the math right on that. Yes. So you mentioned Jerry Jeudy, but then you get into this range. Look at these guys, man. Ricky Pearsall going pick 97. Matthew Golden, 98. Juwan Jennings, 98. Jaden Reed, 104. We've already talked about the injuries. Like, Emeka Egbuka's pick 108. Consensus. This has Underdog baked in at 68. That tells you, guys, right now, ESPN, Emeka Egbuka's pick 128. Okay? 110 right now on Sleeper. 115 on Yahoo. And don't wait until pick 108 to take him. Like, I'm willing to take a guy like Egbuka 1 round early. Because someone in your league is going to be playing best ball or something, and they're going to have like So like you kind of got to figure out how you want to handle it. Like you want to maximize ADP, but the big point being it's another huge sweet spot, man. And honestly, if you start looking at the running backs going in that range, I want to be spending my picks in that range if I can on wide receivers. And so I just added running backs to the mix, guys. And so you're having to take, and I love Jalen Warren, but you're having to take Tyrone Tracy, who's also fine. But these are guys you're having to take around some of these young wide receivers. And then you start to get to some of these other running backs like Quinshawn Judkins. I'm sorry, guys. He should not be going pick 106. He might not even play this year.
Yeah.
Cam Scadaboo, I like, but I'm not taking him over Emeka Egbuka.
No.
I really want to build my draft in a way where I'm getting to target these wide receivers and feel really good about it, that they could be contributing to my team come week 2, right? Yep. They show it to me.
I just wrote my home league strategy guide the other day, and yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot like what you're saying. So we're in strong agreement, and it really does come down to what we've talked about on the show about the wide receiver talent, and then where we're applying all of the things that we've discussed and telling you where we think the talent is. And you and I very much see eye to eye about where the pockets of value are at wide receiver. Those top 9 receivers, I think, are all superstars as well. And I want exposure to those guys in a lot of different formats. And like you said, you're not saying to not draft CeeDee Lamb or anything. But when you're
I think
like
round 2 is massive value at wide receiver because and the reason why is because we have so many really good wide receivers right now that are young and in their prime. Nico Collins in many, many fantasy football seasons is a wide receiver 1 as far as being drafted in round 1.
Yep.
He's going pick 14 at the beginning of round 2 across this consensus ADP. I know you guys listening, you're doing underdog. I already hear you right now. 8-man league. Well, some of these are 10, 12, like it's across like all these formats. Yes, on underdog. But again, that's why you can look at this tool and see on underdog, this guy's going pick 9. So he is a round 1 pick, and that's a sharp market. Now
but
it's
even
a 3
like
wide
Drake
receiver
London,
league.
Who's going 15
Brian
on
Thomas
underdog.
Jr., dude, pick 16.
Yeah. That when I said the top
Drake
9.
London, pick 21.
Yeah, I'm sort of cutting it off there. I love AJ Brown. He's like one of my bigger like brand players.
Is that your tier break? Is London the end of your tier break? I was going to ask.
He is because the pass volume. AJ Brown's I think a top 3 talent, but it's so tricky for him. But London, I think, has the potential. You were just talking about this, the way it could fit with Penix. I think he has the potential to lead the league in targets. I mean, it's crazy how high his volume could go.
Yeah, if you just watch Penix play, he's got that Jameis Winston, Jay Cutler vibe. And if you look at Drake London, again, I'll go back to the Brandon Marshall. Not the exact same player, similar archetype player. He gets open, guys. I'm not saying Drake London's this big, slow guy. Go watch him. Like quick feet for a big dude. Now, he's not going to burn you over the top all the time, but Michael Penix is very willing to push balls into tight windows. He is and you know this better than anyone because of where you went to school and what you got to see with, I still remember you posting that picture on Twitter for the national championship game. I was so excited for you getting to be at that 2 years ago. Unfortunately, the team from Texas, wasn't great, but anyway, it was good for you. But when we look at London, I'm with you. There is such massive target upside here with Penix. Here's a question. People are flipping out about Puka Nacua. Like how I look, I get it. Part of the thing is we have Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. So I'm not going to fault anyone if they want to take Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. over Puka. But let's just be really clear, guys. Puka is an amazing talent. And he's in a scheme that maximizes his talent like about as much as anything can be maximized like on the planet. Like the way he gets utilized is perfect for his game. And I threw this tweet out and people kind of went nuts on it. But my question was is Jimmy Garoppolo schemed to the max in a Sean McVay system? Is he really that different than Russell Wilson throwing to Malik Neighbors?
No.
That's a great question. Think so either.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not
No, I
saying
mean,
that means take
less than
Puka over
ideal
Malik.
because yeah, Matthew Stafford has always been a kingmaker for wide receivers, as
He
you
has.
know. So it does get a little bit scary, but I
But when you look at
like that
Stafford's
point.
yards per game, they're not like amazing. 2 years ago, it was like 260 something. Last year, it was fine. But Jimmy G, when he was in San Francisco in a scheme, doing a lot of the same things, Debo getting all those catches at the line of scrimmage if he read zone, then hitting his backside man beater, aka Devontae Adams. Dude, he was on pace for like 4,300 yards in 2021. Now, like 22 touchdowns. But I mean, that's basically. I'm not saying he's Matthew Stafford, so guys, please
No,
don't
he's
get
not.
twisted because we Matthew Stafford is a very good NFL quarterback. But with Sean McVay, if you told me I had to bet my mortgage on who's going to have more yards passing per game, assuming players are healthy, and it was Jimmy Garoppolo versus Russell Wilson this year, I would take Jimmy G.
Yeah, I mean the McVay thing is very helpful. Part of the Stafford thing that's so great for receivers, even though we didn't throw for a ton of yards, is the concentration gets ratcheted up because sort of the arm talent and the willingness to throw into tight windows and like away from leverage and those things where he will go to his guy and get it there. The same way that Aaron Rodgers could in his peak, and his number ones always had these great numbers, throw at defenders on back shoulders that have their back turned and all that stuff. Every quarterback
But
does
the
that.
big thing people are worried about, they're like, but you have Devontae Adams. But we've already seen this offense consolidated highly across two guys for multiple years.
Yeah. Yeah. And that'll be fine. Nakua has room to give up. He had like a 37% targets per route in his limited sample last year. It was absurd. It was the highest in the league. I'm with you. He's an amazing talent. And then I love that you made the situational point because I kind of just briefly mentioned not being as high on AJ Brown, but AJ Brown's a guy, especially if you go look at like per out run. This guy's been over 2.5 yards per out run every year of his career. Guy is an absolute superstar. But you do have to understand that at the base level, go back to fantasy points per game being maybe the best stat we have. At the base level, we need volume. We need routes. We need to get enough targets to get it. And targets are a volume thing. There's a reason people were 20 years ago, basically, before we had all this data, basically only looking at targets and those things, but we're still pretty good at being able to predict things. Like in some ways we've lost some recipes when we dig into all the per out stuff into a crazy amount. And we're not just focused on
you can lose the forest for the trees.
You
easily.
Absolutely can. And AJ Brown,
I'm showing AJ Brown now, guys. When you see these dark blues, and for those of you looking, like first down share, and this is on a team with Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert on it. 40% of the team's first downs. He had a 33% target share, a 2.99 yards per route run, and 51 freaking percent of the team's air yards.
And yet the points per game column with all of that, and he's better than a lot of the guys ahead of him, it's somehow lower. And that's
here's my question for you, Ben. So here's my thought, though, on AJ Brown. I want exposure. I'm not going nuts on him, to your point. I'm taking Drake London over him pretty much every time he's available. I'm taking Drake London. I've taken Ladd McConkey over him as well. And I've got Ladd McConkey ranked one spot ahead. But AJ Brown, so here's the thing, just really quickly, okay? If we look at the Eagles, yes, we know they're still going to be a run-centric offense, but they had a drop back rate of 48%. Now, they do have the ingredients that if a team was going to be an outlier and do it again, they have the ingredients. The number one thing you have is a highly incorporated quarterback into your run game, and the biggest part of it is scramble rate. So when those dropbacks turn to scrambles, that's ultimately the drop back rate isn't everything. It's the number of times you actually throw the ball that becomes even more important. The drop back it's an intent to pass, but a lot of times it doesn't end up as a pass, 10% or so whenever Jalen Hurts is dropping back because he's scrambling. So
Justin Fields, it's at least 20%.
Yeah, sorry. Did I say Justin Fields? I meant to
No. You said Jalen Hurts, but I was saying
with Justin Fields it's 20%. Oh my God.
Right. Some
You're
guys
gonna take me on another
higher
tangent, which is I'm completely fading Garrett Wilson this year. But
you have to.
That. Devontae Smith. Here's the one thing that I would say. The Eagles in their previous Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts averaged 247 passing yards per game. Last year, he was under 200. The year in between, he was at 227. I think there's room here for them to still be a run-oriented team where their drop back rate, and guys, so drop back rate, that is you drop back, you could be sacked, you could throw the ball, you could scramble. Essentially, it's those three things. But the intent is you're going to throw the ball on that play. Okay. It's really, really rare to see a team repeat a 48% dropback rate. There are also massive leads for the Eagles. If you go back and look at these games where they led by 4 and 7+ points. Now, again, you could also say, Dwayne, look at the Eagles roster. It's by far the best in the NFL, and you're correct. So the door is still open for them to do those things. But I think there's enough room that like it could rebound. And to use a term that like Ben uses, chaos happens. Players get hurt on defense. You got to throw the ball more. Your defense, just for whatever reason, doesn't play as well. I'm with you. I have AJ Brown after those other guys, but I don't have him as a full fade. Like
I do
I'm
too.
not.
I don't have him either. So I have it the same way. I have that big tier break we were talking about, and then I have Ladd and AJ Brown, and then another little smaller tier break before I get.
If
to
it
Tyreek
goes his
Hill.
way, though, Ben, he could score 20 fantasy points per game.
He could.
I think that's the thing you have to keep in mind. But
when a player's this good, you don't want to just bet against situation. It's different than the Marvin Mims conversation, for example, where I think there's holes in the profile that we don't know about. Yeah. We know everything there is to know about AJ Brown. The guy's a superstar, right? And so you don't want to just fade him for situation. That's a mistake.
So we're already at 2 hours, but let's just go a little more. So because what you're saying here brings up something. What do you think is the toughest part, or the thing we get the most wrong when we're projecting? So we've talked about, and if we've talked about the buckets, right? We've talked about talent. We've talked about, the team situation, right? We've talked about the experience, all these different things that we're factoring in. I think one of the things that's the easiest to get wrong is projecting what a team is actually going to do.
Yeah. So I was going to say the same thing. I've done backward looking digs into my projections twice now in my career that were like fairly involved. I did one earlier at CBS and then another one like 2 years ago with the newsletter. And I looked at I do full projections every year. Mm-hmm. I'm not the best projector in the world or anything, but certainly they tie to the market. They tie to Vegas win total over unders and
I do the same.
Implied scoring based on future gambling lines. They tied to multiple other market related things, but I have like an expected touchdown thing, and I'm looking at like pass rate over expected and all these things when I go through. And when I've done these backward looking things, I'm not looking at players. What I'm trying to do is see how good I was at predicting the team volume. Because, the player stuff you can get completely wrong as well. And a lot of that can come down to injuries and stuff. It can just come down to misunderstanding the talent levels and the distribution of the market shares of the rushes or targets or whatever. But going through and looking at what I projected for pure plays, pure pass attempts, and pure rush attempts for all 32 teams, the first time I did this at CBS, I found that I was at least 50 rush or pass attempts away or plays away on 16 of the 32 teams, half the league, which is, and you're talking about plus or minus 50. You're talking about a range of 100 different plays, which when you look at the range from the lowest volume team to the highest volume team in the league, it's like 250 plays or something like that, or 250 passes. It's not that massive. And so then I go back and I'm looking at the aggregate data, but I want to look at the specifics. And I remember the first year I did it, it was a year that the second year I did it was the year that Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles in the first game. And so I was way too high on the Jets pass rate and all that stuff because they didn't have Aaron Rodgers. And that kind of thing can just happen too often. When we talk about the chaos, there's no way that any of us could have known. So when I talk about projections, I often talk about how they're a moving target. We wouldn't have had, if we knew that Aaron Rodgers was going to play 5 snaps or whatever, we would have projected Garrett Wilson's season and Breece Hall's season meaningfully different. But we wouldn't know that. And so we don't have a way of knowing that when we do the projections. But we have to be understanding that we can miss. And I don't think that means that we're doing things. I've went back and looked through my process and whether I'm regressing to the mean enough, and I'm probably regressing to the mean too much in some cases and not willing to take outlier stances on teams that look like they're going to be really pass heavy. Because some of my misses, I was above average on a team, but they were even more aggressive. They were so aggressive in that direction. And so you dig into the things you're wrong about and all the specifics, and you see a lot of the injuries, and a lot of it you're just wrong. I was wrong in some cases, but the general consensus was wrong as well. If we would have known like the trends were going to shift meaningfully in a certain way in advance, we could have all made a bunch of money on that team because they would have been an easy team to bet to go over their win total and do all these different things differently than what all the markets were saying. So it's, I'm probably bad at projections, but it's not just because of that this was happening. And so anyway, the first time I did it, it was 16 of 32 teams. The second time I did it, it was again 16 of 32 teams, which I've taken to mean that even if you do projections very diligently and do the best that you can, it's probably going to be difficult to nail down just the team play volume, pass attempts, and rush attempts, which is the thing that drives all of the things that we do in our projections for more than half the league, which is a crazy thing to think. The other half of the league, we're just going to be wildly wrong on a lot of what we're expecting about the team level stuff to be. And when you're that wrong on the team level stuff, it massively affects.
So I found similar things, and I've actually thought about really not being as aggressive with the outlier projections and honestly having things all closer together, because ultimately, like, what good are you doing if you're going to be in a scenario? And I'm like you, like, I'm grinding on this stuff. I'm researching. I'm like, what things should be in my projections? How should I go about doing them? What should I regress to the league average? What should regress to like the players' last 3 years versus the last year? I mean, like, it's super in depth, but at the same time, like, stuff just happens, and I brought up a table here. Like, it really does matter though, because like, so this is offensive environment for wide receiver finishes by team passing yards per game. This goes back to 2011. And so you can see the sample sizes, and you've got, players that played on a team with 300 plus yards per game. We don't see this hardly anymore. Guys, the average NFL quarterback has thrown for 215 yards per game over the last 3 years. Like, passing is down. Like, what defenses are doing is influencing. Running is more efficient, right? Because they're inviting you to run the ball. But
and the big part of it is the explosives have been down. They're taking, when you take away explosives,
they don't want Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen beating you on, on the last drive on a big play. But the point being, 39% of a sample of 74 wide receivers that were on a team that threw for 300 yards per game. Now, there's some chicken or the egg going on here, because good wide receivers help the passing game, right? So these things are interrelated, but 39% of them were wide receiver ones. If you look at the bottom, which is 175 to 199 yards per game, 0% of them went on to be a top 12 wide receiver. Like, that's Justin Fields. Justin Fields has averaged 180 passing yards per game over his career in the games where he played 90% of the snaps. So got rid of the games where he came in as a sub, got rid of the games he's had some injury history where he got hurt and got knocked out of the games. The games where he essentially played all of it, 180. And so this just brings me, again, it matters because these sort of things, but really what matters are the outliers. And I don't know that we can be that great at projecting the outliers. I do think so with the Jets this year. I'm fading Garrett Wilson.
Right. And this is the way I would think about that personally, is the range of outcomes element and understanding the different ways that things can play out. Cause it's not just throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is meaningful stuff in the projections. And so when I go through the projections process, I am thinking about, okay, if different things go different ways, what does it mean? So like for the Jets, for example, even if Fields isn't the quarterback, Tyrod Taylor's their backup, he also has a higher rate of, he holds the ball and he's mobile and he scrambles, a higher rate of dropbacks that don't become pass attempts, for that stat that you were referencing. And then every one of their offensive linemen graded better as a run blocker than a pass blocker, including the guy they took in the first round this year. They have the 3 running backs. They're constantly talking about how they think those guys are really, really good. And Braylon Allen's looking great in camp. They have a defensive head coach now. And when they've talked about Fields, their new defensive head coach, Aaron Glenn, has referenced his mobility and said that, teams are trying to add this. It helps you attack offense, defenses the other way. I feel pretty strongly
the best way to win as the Jets is to heavily lean into your run.
Is to lean into the run. And even if, so this is like when we get back to the AJ Brown, people will say, well, the Eagles are going to throw more this year, bro. And it's like, yeah, they may, but the range of outcomes is relevant. What does it mean for the Eagles to throw more? How much can I miss by on the Eagles? That's the question you need to ask yourself. There are situations where it's very uncertain and you could miss by a lot. There's other situations where it's a lot more clear as we dig into the data and the information that we have.
So for AJ Brown, like, I don't think they'll be at a 48% drop back rate again.
Yeah,
like, because it's just really hard to repeat.
It's going to go up,
but they'll still be a run centric team, right? But I think at 54%, I think I have them projected at 52 or 53. It could be enough, like 255 yards per game instead of 190 or whatever it was for Jalen Hurts last year. Like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually, over the course of a season, it is, for a guy like AJ Brown, who's so demonstrative as far as the way he dominates everything on the team. So I think with AJ Brown, like, for me, like, it's priced in really well.
It is, but the argument is like, can he be the like overall wide receiver one? Can that ceiling? I do agree with you, and I'm projecting it very similarly. I'm looking at my Eagles projections right now, but how high can that ceiling get? Because, like, yes, I agree with you that they're going to throw more. I think Hurts is probably a decent value at QB4. Like, I don't think he should be ahead of anyone else, but I think there's a tier break after him, and people don't have him in the group with the other three. But I'm like, I think he's a little bit undervalued. He should be in the group with the other three. So I agree with all of that, but part of it is like, okay, but where does this range stretch to for Brown? Obviously I'm struggling with Brown because I really love the talent. He's been a guy that I've been on all throughout his career. I hate that I don't necessarily want to draft him more, but I agree with you. He's very draftable. And
I do think he's in a range where he's draftable because you're getting to running backs that, like, I love Chase Brown's role. I don't necessarily love Chase Brown, the player. Like, he might still be good, but I think he was okay last year. The main thing is they just gave him a ton of work. Now it looks like he's going to get it again because we've got Zach Moss gone. Samaje Perine maybe takes the long down and distance stuff. So it's tough for me because I'm like, man, I know AJ Brown is a badass. Like, Chase Brown, like, I'm basically taking projected volume like that. Like that's what I'm betting on if I'm going to take him in round 2. And I have taken some Chase Brown, in round 2. Just real quick though, pivoting to Garrett Wilson. I went back and so I said 0% of wide receivers, right, that were in that group went on to have a wide receiver 1 finish. And I got a good question on Twitter. Hey, curious how the wide receiver talent factors in, because that's the big thing, right? Everybody's like, oh, well, Garrett Wilson's going to get all the targets. And he probably is, guys. He's going to get like a 25 to 30% target share. Like, that's probably incoming for Garrett Wilson. And then you get the DJ Moore example. Well, DJ Moore, it happened for him. Guys, don't, like, that's variance. DJ Moore we like, but that's a variance season to do that with Justin Fields, because essentially what you're saying is Justin Fields, like, if you believe that about DJ Moore, is actually, he could be a way better quarterback if he wanted. He was just crappy by his own choosing and just still happened to be able to support DJ Moore. Like, it doesn't make sense, like, when you step back. But here are the guys that had a 25% target share or higher that played in an offense that threw for 175 to 200 yards back to 2011. Corey Davis, average 11.5 fantasy points. Drake London, 10.7 fantasy points. Michael Crabtree, 11.7 fantasy points. Vincent Jackson, 15.2. So I think people are misunderstanding what they think they're getting in round 3 with Garrett Wilson, even though he's a really good talent. Like, you're probably, if I had to bet, you're buying a wide receiver 3 in round 3 of your fantasy draft.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, even the DJ Moore example, I've argued that I'm with you. It was like the way I like to look at some past data. I think people have a tendency to look at past data as if it was the only ever possible outcome and that it represents some type of a median outcome. But we always talk about range of outcomes, ceiling, floor, etc. I like to look at past data from the mindset of, like, what percentile outcome was this? I think it's very clear that was for DJ Moore, as you said, variance was a ceiling outcome. It was something like a 90th percentile outcome. Yep. And even still, he was, I think, the wide receiver 6 in total points because he played all 17 games, but like wide receiver 8 or 9 in PPR points per game, which is good. But it also wasn't like, oh, this buried me when I faded him in the 4th round. Like, you're paying such a high price that the way I think about fades is like, even if they hit, can they bury me if I don't have them? And DJ Moore was tough to not have a lot of exposure to, but he wasn't a top 5 overall wide receiver. And I think that's basically out of the question for Garrett Wilson this year. And when you're taking a wide receiver in round 3, you want to be able to tell yourself he has top 5 overall wide, upside is what it comes to. It doesn't have to hit that, but I do think you want to believe that he has that.
I agree. And I mean, it's just look, and I feel for Garrett Wilson because I really like him. Like I've been on the Garrett Wilson train like all along. Like I think he does a lot of things we want to see from a talent perspective. Like he was a really good prospect coming out. It's not been a good. He's been really unlucky, to be honest. Like having to play with Zach Wilson for 2 years, then you get Aaron Rodgers. He gets hurt right away in the first 5 snaps of a game, and then okay, great, it's going to be your year with Aaron Rodgers, and they trade for Devontae Adams. Like it's been a tough run out, for Garrett Wilson. I do think he's a good player, but I think he should be priced more like a round 5 wide receiver.
Yep.
I think he's going 2 rounds early. Real quick. I'm going to pass the scheme stuff. I know you and we both talk about scheme quite a bit, like in our write-ups, but guys, you can check out Ben's work. You can also check out mine over at FantasyLife.com. We'll plug all Ben's work here at the end, so you know where to find it. But was just going to ask you, let's do like some rapid fire. I'm just going to pull up this ADP. Okay. And I'm going to get this on the screen where people can see all of it. Let's just real quickly on the wide receivers. Let's do a couple things. We'll just walk down this list. Let's talk about where we think the tier breaks are. Number 1. And then any quick comments on what you think that means for somebody's draft strategy. And let's think about it this way. Early rounds 1 through 3, 1 through 4, something like that. Mid rounds, right? That's like for me, 4 to 6, 5 to 7, and then late rounds and how that, and then we'll kind of tie a bow on it, like with what that means. We hit on some of this like briefly earlier, but I want to make sure people get some actionable takeaways. Like as far as like, I know some people just want to know, hey man, for my draft strategy and the way these wide receivers are lining up, what does it look like? So for me, like looking at this right now, consensus ADP. So folks listening, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas, Drake London. Those are the top 10 wide receivers going right now, consensus, again, across all these sites. Where do you think the tier break is? And if there's a player like for me, like I'm not putting Amon-Ra St. Brown number 4.
Right. He's in that second. So the tiers in my rankings that I do normal tier breaks, and then there's a couple spots in each positional group that I put a little thing called a big tier break, where I think
let's talk about that.
I think there's a pretty significant drop off. I think there's a smaller tier break within that 9, but I think there's a big tier break after Drake London. I think that's when you get to the gap between these 9 guys that are, I think you just named all 9 of them, that are the absolute they're first round profiles. And as you said, there's too many of them. So a lot of them go in second round, but they are all first round wide receiver profiles. And then right behind that is the Ladd McConkey and AJ Brown sort of mini tier.
That's a mini tier. Yeah. So I've had those 2 in the same tier as the guys above, but I can see, we're just real quickly on McConkey. What is it? It's that we've got 1 year of production and now they add Keenan Allen. No. It could be a run heavy team. What is it for you that makes the tier break?
I think the profile is actually incredibly strong. I think it's more about the team level stuff. They were the slowest pace in the league last year. They're going to be a run lean.
And Greg Roman's done this for a long time.
So the play volume is probably not going to be friendly. This is one of the ones where I do think the range of outcomes on the play volume is probably pretty low. It's probably pretty meaningfully low, especially now that they lose Rashawn Slater and really hurt their tackle situation. I love Ladd McConkey. I think he's a really good player. I think he was underrated in the prospect.
Did you just call him Glad McConkey? Because that would be an amazing name. Because you're glad to have McConkey. I mean,
I love that. I look a lot at like the per route stuff as the foundational stuff. We were talking about process earlier, and I don't know if I ever really dug into this, but like the breaking up yards per out into its component parts, targets per out and yards per target, understanding how ADOT layers in. And you do have to understand that there's stuff that influences the per out data. Like we talked about with guys like Marvin Mims, for example, you do need to know the context, but I think that's really good foundational data for me to then work off and fill in all the blanks of all this sort of unexplained variant stuff. And anyway, Ladd McConkey injured a lot in college, but had really good per route data playing with the greatest tight end of all time, Brock Bowers.
Yeah.
And so he was still very productive comes in right away and has a very productive rookie season. I think this guy's incredibly talented. I think from a talent perspective, that's why he's in this mini tier with AJ Brown. I mean, I don't think he's as good as AJ Brown. I think AJ Brown is insanely good.
Yeah.
But I do think Ladd McConkey is talented enough to be in the group with a lot of the guys above him, like Drake London and those dudes.
I do too.
But those dudes are in offenses that could throw so much. I mean, and are going to be hyper concentrated. And I'm really concerned about the Chargers' total play volume and what that means for a ceiling for McConkey. But yeah, I mean, he's
19.2 fantasy points per game, basically once he took over a full-time role.
Stud
last season. Yeah, this is a really good player. If you've seen Matt Harmon's reception perception stuff on him, I mean, just this dude he can shake people. Like you talk about route running and it mattering for a player, because for some players, honestly, like the route running stuff, like the route and separation stuff is just noise. I think Harmon does the best job with it. Looking at what you get with Ladd McConkey, like it all makes sense. And like his chemistry with Justin Fields in the red zone is amazing. Like for being a smaller player. So yeah, completely with you on McConkey. I like the idea
it's
of where
purely
you're
a
at.
ceiling concern because he's with the rest of those guys. If you're not thinking purely,
but yeah, can he be the wide receiver 1 overall? Probably not. Like Jamar Chase can, Justin Jefferson can, CeeDee Lamb can, Puka Nacua can. We got pending health questions there. Malik Neighbors can. I think Nico Collins could be the wide receiver 1 overall. I think Brian Thomas Jr. could be the wide receiver 1 overall. You think Drake London could also be the wide receiver 1 overall?
I think it's very close with him. I mean, he only had 300-yard games last year.
He's almost a mini tier break for me again, because I have enough questions about his quarterback and scheme, and he doesn't have the big play upside of some of these other guys that we talked about. Right? But now you could argue Lamb is similar. Like Lamb does make big plays after the catch, but he's not like Jefferson or Chase, who can literally cook you any which way.
Yeah. One of the things we're talking about passing yards being down is that lack of explosives. And I have been trying to think through this differently a little bit this year. And I do think there's the possibility to get to the big receiving yardage seasons that these guys that can meaningfully dominate volume in the deep intermediate range and get a lot of 15 to 20 yard catches and rack up a lot of 100-yard games. So 2 of his 300-yard games last year came just in the 3 Penix starts. That's where I think Penix is the best. He gets talked about as a deep ball thrower. He's good at throwing the deep ball. He throws a really pretty deep ball. He's not quite as accurate as he's deadly in the intermediate range. I'm a UW alum, watched a lot of the UW football with Penix, and I think the skill overlap with Drake London in that deep intermediate range is really, really strong, and the target volume could be massive because of that. You talked through it, how he's probably going to, like, when you're guarded by one guy, you're open, get thrown open a little bit in this situation. Darnell Mooney's banged up and everything. So I think London could lead the league in targets, is the way that I was saying it earlier. Yeah. And then it's just a matter of, is there enough deep intermediate?
Yeah, it's the Brandon Marshall thing. Brandon Marshall wasn't blowing people away over the top, but dude averaged 170 targets with Jay Cutler in 2 years.
And if he does, it's exactly the comp. It's great. And if he does hit that type of target volume, there's enough chunk play volume.
Very hard to hold somebody down.
Yeah. He definitely has top 3. He may not have the, like, if Jamar Chase hits his ceiling season or Justin Jefferson hits his ceiling season, or what I think Malik Neighbors' ceiling season could look like, I don't think Drake London can hit those dudes' ceiling. But he'll be
rapid fire. Where are you putting Puka now? Because he's going 5 here. I think you move him below Neighbors, Collins.
I have Neighbors ahead. I have a hard time with the Stafford stuff right now, and so I don't have him move down too far. I have him in the same tier as Nico and Brian Thomas. I still have Puka ahead of him right now in my ranks, but man, I could drop him below those guys.
Yeah, so if you're worried about it, guys, with Stafford, like, it's understandable, and you still have really good options. You're not having to take a massive tier break to go down, but I do believe there is a mini tier break up top, and Puka belongs as a talent in the top group, right? Just what he's done over his first 2 years. Okay, so a little tier break from London to AJ Brown and Ladd McConkey, and then I think we're on the same page. Hard tier break to T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, JSN, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Micah. Dude, there are massive questions with these players. JSN's the guy I'm in on. Like, he's the one that I've definitely drafted the most. I mean, he broke out in the second half. Great college profile, breaks out in the second half of his second season. It's back to the Trey McBride thing you said. we've got Cooper Kupp, and that's it. Really, right now, I just feel like he's another guy that will it surprise us if he gets 160 targets. Like
the only reason it might is they all they can talk about is how much they want to run the ball, and they had a fullback out there in the preseason, and they fired Ryan Grubb after 1 year. The offense wasn't even that bad, but just because he called too many pass plays, Mike McDonald wants to win through defense and running the ball, and they brought in Clint Kubiak, and that's what they're going to run the crap out of the ball in Seattle. So that's a little
to me though. He's almost like I could make a case, in my opinion, that you tier him right there next to Ladd McConkey.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Yeah. So after that little
it's a similar.
I don't have Higgins this high, but I go Tyreek Hill and then JSN. I have him right there. I think he belongs right there. You may have him over Tyreek even, but it's
no. I have them right there together. I've taken JSN more because he tends to fall down past where Tyreek goes. I've pretty much faded Devontae Adams. I've faded Garrett Wilson. I've sprinkled in Marvin Harrison because the profile, right, is still good. But man, the vibes are not good with his style of play and with what goes on with Kyler and just the offense overall. I don't know it's creative enough. And essentially they're just asking Marv to go out there and win on an island. He doesn't get the benefit that a lot of these other guys get. He doesn't get the Sean McVay treatment. He doesn't get the Kyle Shanahan treatment. He gets none of that. And maybe that changes, and I'm hopeful that it does, or maybe he just takes such a step forward in his game that it doesn't matter. But even and I don't want to overreact, but even in all the training camp videos that people post, they're like, oh my God, look at Marv. I'm like, Jesus, he has an inch of separation again. You just can't live that way.
And then Kyler in the first preseason game moved the ball down the field with some shorter throws and then threw a ball right to a defender.
So I don't want to overreact, but it's like
I'm
not on a full. Where are you on Marv?
No, I don't.
I'm not a full fade, but I'm not taking him a ton.
I've sprinkled him in. Everyone you just said I'm the same way about, and everything you just said about Marv, I agree with. So I don't want to sit and repeat it all, but I completely agree with. My concern is Kyler Murray can't see it on the field. I mean, it's a little bit of, to simplify it. The only guy that I'm slightly different is I've taken a decent amount of Devontae Adams. I don't love it.
Okay.
At first, I was like, man, his skills did decline last year. Even though Aaron Rodgers was force feeding him, his targets per out really declined from his peak years. His efficient yards per target after the target efficiency really declined. And even though he had some big plays, like the Marvin Mims point that I was making earlier, like Adams had some big plays. He had 2 long TDs in that Jacksonville game, or long plays. I don't know if they both went for TDs.
If you had Adams at the end of last year on your fantasy team, you were likely riding him deep into the playoffs.
Yeah, he was doing great. But even despite that, his overall yards per target not necessarily through the roof. There's some concerning age decline stuff. The issue is everything we talked about with Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford being a kingmaker, etc. And the reasons that I'm in on Puka, and you said it can still exist with 2 guys.
Yeah.
Because I don't like this range very much. Adams is the one dude in this range where I'm like, I mean, there's some scenarios, especially if Nuka were to Nuka were to miss some.
You're coming up with some amazing names. We have Glad McConkey and Nuka. Nakua. That sounds great too, because it's like a nuclear explosion. I mean,
Nuka Pakua is, dude. I'm gonna name my fantasy team Nuka Pakua this year. All
right, so I like that. I probably need to rethink my stance on Adams.
It's more about who else are you going to take in this range that has real ceiling. I agree.
I've just been off of it.
Yeah.
You know what I've been doing? I've been taking the dual threat elite quarterback down there. I'm like, oh, you left me Josh Allen. Okay.
Yeah.
You left me Jaden Daniels.
You let quarterbacks too. Yeah.
I'll occasionally mix in some George Kittle there. And a lot of times, honestly, I'm taking JSN over those guys. He falls to the end of round 3. So I'll just take JSN. I do need to diversify. There are enough questions around. I love the profile for JSN, but there are enough environmental concerns. Sam Darnold pressure, all that. I don't want to go too deep because I'm fading Terry McLaurin. Touchdown regression. Dude, I'm glad he had his day, but holding out. DK Metcalf. Yeah, he's older. DK Metcalf,
I realize how old he is. He's never had a 1,200 yard season at 30. You're really betting on that. I think people are double counting the Jaden Daniels thing. They're like, oh, he's Jaden Daniels number 1. I'm like, he was last year, and Jaden Daniels played at a borderline MVP level. You already got that season last year, and he didn't have 1,200 yards. You should be concerned that he's not going to take it to another level this year. Daniels has to play even better. I mean, he probably will, but there's other guys that the quick hit stuff they do in the offense doesn't go to McLaurin necessarily. They brought in Debo for that. They drafted Jalen Lane for that. I mean, he's the vertical threat, but his targets per out, it doesn't get to the elite levels like some of these other guys because he's more of the vertical downfield guy. His efficiency's strong, but you need him to be even better than last year. He's going like wide receiver 18. He was like wide receiver 16 in points per game, even with the second most receiving TDs in the NFL last year. I mean, he's a clear fade if the TD regression dips at all. There's no real ceiling beyond that.
Yeah. And I think that, just real quickly, the challenge on T. Higgins is like, I think he's very similar to a lot of these other profiles we're about to talk about that I can get like after T. Higgins. T. Higgins obviously has amazing contingent value if something happened to Jamar Chase and he plays with Joe Burrow. So I'm not saying there's not a scenario that plays out to where you're like, wow, I needed T. Higgins to win my fantasy league. It could definitely happen. But again, so rapid fire, like DK, I mix in some, like, because we have seen
pretty
Aaron
out because
Rodgers.
Arthur Smith would be my rapid fire.
Yeah. Well, so I would say I'm good with that. I mix him in, but I'm below, like, I don't even have 8%. So I'm like 5% DK. DJ Moore, I don't have much of.
I don't either.
Xavier Worthy, though, is a target here.
Yes.
Rasheed Rice.
This is where you get into the frothy range. Yeah, I don't get a lot of Sutton because I'm too busy targeting the other dudes. I don't get a lot of Devonta Smith because of. I mean, Devonta Smith's a really good number 2 with contingent upside, but the pass volume stuff's a little bit concerning. And this is a range where I want access to all these other dudes: Pickens, Jameson, McMillan, Hunter.
I hate it because Devonta Smith is a good player and I don't draft him much. But I'm with you. I'm taking Pickens over him. Jameson Williams. This is all I have to say to people. I get it, guys, whatever. But last year was really his first year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was hurt. Then he was suspended. He was in the doghouse. Last year was his first year to start. And people, to your point, are holding this target share thing against him when he had Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta on the team. It's still an offense we like. Here's the question I think you have to ask yourself, and it goes back to what you said, Ben, about like you got to imagine what the ceiling can be for these players. Jameson Williams is still a young, ascending talent who in his first year getting to start for his team was a valuable fantasy asset where you got to draft him last year. What happens if he gets a 24% target share this year?
Yeah.
He is the kind of player that if that does happen, he could, to your point, we're drafting him in round 1 next year.
Yeah. And all they talk about all offseason is how they want to feature him more. I mean, him and Gibbs, they're just like, we want to feature these dudes in our offense way more.
Yeah, it's going to be less like exact schemed up plays for a player. Still doing some of those things Ben Johnson did, but really just more, we're just going to really ramp up everything around these dudes.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. That makes Amon-Ra really tricky at the beginning as well. But I do think, he overcame.
Amon-Ra could make it, in that scenario. But I'm with you. Amon-Ra, like I have him at the end of round. I love the Sun God. We've got him at the end of round 1. Ted McMillan, man, pick 66 consensus ADP like that. Basically, if you're following my rankings, you're going to draft Ted McMillan every draft if he's going at pick 66 because I have him at like 40.
He's the only dude behind Xavier Worthy on this list that I think I have ranked ahead of him. I mean, I have Xavier Worthy ahead of where he goes. I have him at wide receiver 19. I have McMillan at wide receiver 18. And he on this list
I'm 19. I'm wide receiver 19. And I'm by far the highest on our site on him.
Yeah.
So
that's where he belongs, I think.
Travis Hunter, I'm buying.
I am too.
I get it, but dude, it's priced in, man. You're getting Travis Hunter at pick 69. He's the number 2 pick in the draft. He had a great production profile in college. This is a guy that, like, when we talk about outliers, like Travis Hunter could be just like one of the most massive outliers ever. I get it. Folks are worried. What if he plays 70% offense? It could happen, guys, but you're getting him at pick 70 in your draft. You have to understand, what if Travis Hunter plays 85% of the snaps on offense on pat? Doesn't even need to be snaps. He has an 85% route participation. When they're throwing the ball, he's on the field. Dude.
There's some really fun Liam Cohen stuff with the Jags where, last year with Baker Mayfield, Baker's ADOT the year prior, passing ADOT was like 9.0, and he brought it all the way down to like 7.2 or something. Both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin had career high yards per out run. Both of them had other great seasons. Evans, obviously, a ton of them. Career high yards per out run at career low ADOTs. So Cohen did this thing where he got these much more schemed open, a lot more. You talked about how they used Evans creatively, a lot more short area. And for Evans, that was still an above average ADOT. He's still always been and will always be a vertical receiver.
But it was his lowest of his career.
It was his lowest of his career, and yet he got the highest yards per out run. And ADOT correlates with yards per target, which is a massive factor in yards per out run. So it's pretty dang meaningful that with the ADOT falling, these guys were better in yards per out run. And the whole issue with Trevor Lawrence throughout most of his career has been that this is a guy that everyone likes the fact that he's willing to push it vertically. You want these QBs that push it vertically, but somebody has needed to rein him in and not have him push too much. He's got a high rate of interceptions in the red zone, trying to throw into coverages where he needs to take the check down, take the underneath throw. That's one of the most fascinating storylines in the NFL in 2025 is can Liam Cohen bring Trevor Lawrence's ADOT down and increase his efficiency simultaneously the way he did with Baker Mayfield, whose completion percentage was like 64% at the higher number and went over 70% the next year. I mean, Mayfield's always been a good QB, but his numbers look crazy year over year when Liam Cohen took over. And that's exactly what Lawrence needs, I think.
Yep.
To that point, Travis Hunter had 3, I think it was, short targets in the one preseason drive. There was a bunch of short targets. Brian Hunter had 1. I know Hunter Brian
played
Thomas
second string defense.
Yeah. I mean, he was getting a bunch of short, quick looks. You might get a lot of targets in a shorter area.
I think our signal for Hunter is he's gonna play more on offense and he's gonna be a situational defensive player. Now I've seen these camp reports of all the snaps of how often he's lined up on defense and on offense. I kind of throw that out because it's practice. You have to learn how to play the positions regardless of how much they're going to play you in the games. So and maybe I'm wrong for that, but to me, like you have to get your reps in practice either way for the coaches to feel like they can trust you on the field. But I feel like the overall the signal that we've heard them tell us, the coach, Gladstone has also said it, has all really been, and from the get-go, from the draft all the way through now has been the same information. And then you see it in the preseason has been, he's going to play more on offense.
Yeah. And if he does, I mean, of all the things I just said, the thing that I think is most notable is under Liam Cohen, both Godwin and Evans posted career high yards per out run. Like he showed a clear ability to scheme the ball to his best receivers. And that's, I mean, Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter are very clearly those guys.
All right. So let's wrap this up in like 5. It feels impossible for us at this point, but we'll try.
We're going to be podcasting forever. So, it's week 1. We're still talking about these profiles.
It's okay. People, they'll love it and they can put it on 2x speed. That's the way I look at it. So you got Calvin Ridley, Waddle's another name here, pick 74. So I'm just going to call it out, guys. This is a very talented player. There's a lot of ways this could go right for him. You just get Tua healthy. If Tyreek Hill did hit a cliff, Waddle's suddenly the number 1 wide receiver on this.
And there's
offense.
been some reports that we might be seeing that in camp. That camp looks a little different this year than the
injuries.
last couple.
Matt Harmon charted it, and basically put out there the look, Tyreek Hill. I've seen guys bounce back, but not to the level that Hill was at before with what he charted. So then we've got this other group here, and I'm going to stop naming all of them. Is there a name that's on your screen right now that you particularly want to call out for folks that like this is a guy that you're hyper targeting?
Well, Addison's out there, and we started the show with him.
We already hit him, so good one.
Yeah, Judy and Olave are 2 good ones that I think both of them, their talent level is probably multiple rounds higher than where they go. I understand the concern. These are the 2 offenses when you use look-ahead lines that are projected to score the fewest amount of points in the NFL. And the quarterback stuff and all of that is very valid.
But you think it's pretty well priced in?
It's pretty well priced in. Yep.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the young. Talk about the year 2 and rookie guys, where you're at on them, because people hear me talk about them all the time. So
really like it. Golden, you mentioned Ibuka earlier. He's flying up boards. I mean, I'd take him ahead of Golden now, and he's meaningfully behind in this list. If you're in a home league where he goes this late, I think you got to take him. The drum beat on Ibuka is just insane.
I will say this: if you're in a home league, like there's certain things I don't trust. We put this data together to give you guys a robust picture. But Ibuka, if you really want him, don't be afraid to reach around ahead of this. This says 108. I mean, so that means you're essentially looking at what, round 9? Because 10 is 120, right? If you're in a 12-teamer. So if you really want Ibuka and you feel like it's what you need for your roster, like I'm okay with you pulling the trigger as early as round 8, but like round 9, it depends on where you're picking from. But just know there's enough drumbeat around this guy. I'll be surprised that this ADP holds up.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that you're two guys. I'm a little bit more. I mean, I'm a big UW fan. I'm concerned about a Dunze. I'm concerned about Pearsall, who's the one on the screen now.
Man,
For a little
Pearsall
bit.
is steaming up boards over on Underdog.
Yeah, because of the Jawan Jennings stuff, and I kind of get it. I'm kind of in, but man, he
No,
played
I'm buying. But he's a guy where it's like, hey, I don't know for sure, so I'm going to get exposure. But like, am I all in? No.
Yeah, he didn't have a very good production profile in college, and he didn't have a great
No.
per route profile last year. Everyone's like, oh, look at the last
older
2 games.
prospect. Yeah, he had
Everyone's like,
2 weeks.
Yeah,
that's it.
and everyone's like, he got shot, and then he had the late 2 weeks, and I'm like, you're missing a lot there. He came back and got some volume right away when he came back, and then was running a bunch of routes for like a 4-week span where he got nothing, was not earning anything during a time when all the good players that are back this year were not there, right? Like
The
IU's
supermodel
gonna be
did
back
not
for-
like Ricky Pearsall. What the rookie supermodel said about Ricky Pearsall is that the 49ers reached about a round.
Yeah, I think that's
they're
valid.
the 49ers. I'm just
you
me.
had-
I'm some dude, according to everyone else. I'm living in my mom's basement, like looking at spreadsheets. But it wasn't ideal. So he worries me. I want some exposure, so I take him when he falls past ADP, but I've not been chasing him up.
Yeah, I'm not either. I like Jaden Higgins a little bit lower, and I like Luther Burden would be the other 2 rookies that I'm really targeting.
Great values on those.
Yep.
Like, so guys, right now, when you look at Higgins, pick 125, Luther Burden going 147 right now in home league. So these are guys that you can get with your very last, heck, your drafts may not even go this long, but
Right.
like these are guys you can get at the very, very end. So Kyle Williams, we already talked about earlier. So I think this is it, man. I think we put a good wrap on it. I would say, just as a quick recap though, guys, like, my running back strategy article is already out. The wide receiver strategy article comes out tomorrow. The quarterback tight ends are already out. So if you're drafting this weekend, you have all that available to you. But Ben, tell them where they can find the information from you.
Yeah, I have a newsletter over at Substack, a newsletter company. bengretch.substack.com is the website. It's called Stealing Signals. In season, right? Kind of weekly fantasy focused game recaps. Watch all the games. A lot of it is data based. It's not as heavily data based as your awesome stuff at the utilization report. It's a little bit more what I saw and didn't see in some of those things as well, and just talking through the ways that players' valuations are changing throughout the season. And then right now I just wrote a home league strategy guide. I did a preseason version of that where I watched all the preseason games and wrote up all of the takeaways from all the meaningful snaps in the preseason game. So good information there, I think. Reading a lot of camp reports, doing those types of things. Going to do an auction guide, a super flex guide coming up. So kind of covering all the different strategy tent poles, and then also all the rankings, and I had full projections that I don't keep updated but released at the end of July, and then the rankings are updating every single day.
And where do folks go again to find it?
bengretch.substack.com.
There you go. Well, man, hey, I really appreciate you. We could talk all day. Like, this could be an 8-hour show. I can already hear my producers now. Wow. 2 hours or 40 minutes. We're stretching the boundaries of this stretching our legs thing. But man, I had an absolute blast. My guess is that folks hanging out with us also going to have a really good time as well. And if you guys got to put it on 2X, that's how CEOs listen to their shows. And we know you guys are all super sharp, so you can listen to it on 2X as well. So appreciate you, Ben. And man, I look forward to doing this again at some point.
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast. I love chopping up with you. I'm glad to hear we're seeing things very similarly, and hopefully the listeners are taking that as a positive about the way that they can approach receivers this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to be on the same page as you. Very sharp guy. So again, all right, guys, we will see you tomorrow. I will be back with Rich Rebar for episode number 3 of Talk Data to Me, and we're going to talk about wide receivers again, but we're going to specifically focus on late wide receiver breakouts. What are some of the things you guys want to be looking for? What are the things you maybe want to shy away from? So more with Rich Rebar tomorrow, and I will see you then.